And I think we are live. Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming to hang out today. We keep seeing these Samsung frame TVs kind of all over the place. I know our tech support department takes calls on them constantly. Not that there's anything wrong with them, but that's just how popular they are as we see them all the time now. And they're really cool, right? Like they show off artwork and they have that really cool matte finish. And you know, a lot of people are using them as a TV as well as an art display, if you will. So well, they're watching movies. How well does it calibrate? It has a regular Samsung menu. So I thought this would be a good opportunity to just go through one with you guys. I'm 100% starting on this TV from scratch. So you might as well think of it as, you know, new out of the box, but with some hours on it. Before we started this morning, I went ahead and did a firmware update, which I was behind. Always want to do a firmware update before you start working on a TV. And I did already make the profile. I used the Jetty. Oh, actually charging in the other room. I used my Jetty to profile the Klein K10 so we can get through this as fast as possible. Depending on how much time we have, I might do some HDR measurements at the end. We'll see how the SDR stuff goes. But if you guys have any questions as I'm going along here, I'm flying solo, so I'll keep checking the question box and whatnot. But if you guys do have any questions, or we're going to learn this together. So maybe you've run into one before. If we bump into something weird, feel free to speak up. Again, this is a live, real environment. I don't know this TV all that well yet, so we're going to learn together. So again, thank you so much for coming to hang out. And oh, hi everybody. We've got a couple highs in the chat box there, some familiar names. Thank you guys so much for hanging out. I do anticipate this taking probably a couple hours. So I'm not going to be offended if you have to drop off for any reason. That's no problem. I am recording this, so it will be on YouTube maybe this afternoon, if not by the end of the week for sure. So let me just go through real quick here on the setup that I'm using. Bear with me while I turn the camera around. So here you have the Samsung frame TV. You can see the Klein K10. It's already set up and profiled and ready to go. What you might not be able to see, it's in front of me over here, there we go, is the Murideo 7G. I'm using the 7G generator for test patterns. And today we're going to be using CalMan. We're just going to use a very, the very universal ISF calibration workflow. It's a great workflow for people who maybe who don't do this a lot, or they just want to make sure they're not missing any steps. The ISF workflow is great because it kind of just walks you through the process. Make sure you double check some things at the end. So you don't miss anything. But you know, there are some other folks out there who like to build their own workflows, which I'm a huge fan of. I think that's really cool. But for today's purposes, we'll go through the ISF calibration workflow. So if anybody has any questions before we start, feel free to type those into the question box. And if you guys want to type questions in as we go along, like I said, I am flying solo, but I'll check the question box every now and again. There is a hand raising icon, so if you want to use that, feel free to use that. And then if you are watching this live, if you see the camera and my screen at the same time, there is a slider on your screen. So if you wanted to make the camera, if you want to make the camera a little bit bigger, or if you wanted to make my screen a little bit bigger, you can move that slider around and make things as big or as small as you would like. So, okay, so again, this TV is, we've had it now for a little while, so it has some hours on it, but I did a factory reset on it. So we're basically gonna treat this TV as if it's brand new out of the box. I do wanna go through and take some readings on pre-calibration, so we'll see like how much work needs to be done with it. And then we'll learn the TV together. We'll go hunt for like any energy savings features. We'll look at the different picture modes. We'll look at the different color temperatures. I know this TV does have different options for the color gamut. The Samsung menu is pretty universal amongst the different lines and the different models, but there might be some different things in this menu that we can play with and see exactly what they do. But it should be pretty straightforward. Samsung's had the same menu now for lots and lots of years, and it's pretty easy to navigate. And hopefully with the camera aiming on the screen, you might be able to pick up some tips and tricks. One thing I would recommend right away is if you do plan on working on a lot of Samsung TVs, or if you do already, I would plan on getting yourself a traditional Samsung remote that actually has all the buttons and the numbers and whatnot. The remote that this TV comes with, and most Samsungs these days, it just has all the buttons that you really need as an end user. Just change channel, change volume, open up apps and things like that. I do always like to have that Samsung remote with me. And really the main reason is we're not going to do it this time because we're not going to do multiple picture modes for SDR. But with Samsungs, you can go into the service menu and you can turn on day and night mode if you'd like. They are exact copies of movie mode. So if you're just going to calibrate one mode and maybe the room is kind of dark, then I just like to stick with the movie mode, and that's fine. If we were going to calibrate a day mode and a night mode, then I probably would go in and unlock the cal day and cal night modes. But you do need a service, I'm sorry, you don't need a service remote per se, but to get into the service menu, you will need a Samsung remote with numbers on it. You got to be careful in the service menu. We have to stress this every time we talk about service menus. I do not recommend going into the service menu unless you know exactly where you're supposed to be in there and exactly what buttons to push. It is very easy to brick a Samsung TV in the service menu. If you don't believe me, go on Google or your search engine of choice and type in Samsung HDMI calibration failure, and you will see articles about this going back till probably 2008 or 9, maybe even before that. So I don't recommend going to the service menu, but you can if you'd like to. I'll let you guys do the research on how to do that and where in the menu those cal day and cal night modes are. Okay, so as we're looking at the CalMan screen right now, I did already get the equipment connected up to CalMan, and like I said, I did already make the profile with the Jetty to the Klein meter. If you guys want to see how the profiles are done, there's lots of videos out there that go through that process. Portrait Displays has a video on their website, or I'm sorry, on their YouTube channel, and then I'm pretty sure there's been several videos that I've done in the past where the process of making the profile is there too. So we're not going to do that. I've already done that. The other thing I've already done is gotten everything connected to CalMan, and we are pretty much ready to rock and roll. So opening screen of CalMan, this is nothing new to people who've used it before. Just kind of welcomes you to the software and gives you a little bit of an idea what's going on. Next on this page, we're going to get the hardware connected, which we've already done, but this is where you could, one place where you could do it. One thing I do think is important here is when you're connecting your test pattern generator, in my case, we're using the Murideo 7G, I do need to tell CalMan to tell the Murideo what size test patches to put up on the screen as we're going through the calibration. It is LCD, so I like to use full 100%. I did do some very preliminary testing earlier, and I did not see a difference between 10% windows and full fields, which is very normal for an LCD like this one that might not have local dimming. Step number 3 for find the display or the processor. If we were going to connect to the display and do any kind of auto cal, or if we were going to connect to something external video processor, we could do that there, but we're not going to do that because we're not using one of those. Another simple page where you're supposed to put the meter. We've already got the meter in place, so we can just breeze through that. Now this TV does come from the factory in standard picture mode. I like to record that, just so we know what our baseline was. Since this TV was factory, there was really no reason for me to go through and fill out the individual settings here on this page. But a lot of times if I find a TV and it already has settings that somebody's put in there, I do like to record them here. Maybe somebody does want to go back one day and compare pre and post. That's okay. But in this case, because it's factory, we're going to leave it in standard picture mode to take the pre-measurement readings. And then down here, I just put myself a little note that we're using the factory settings. Okay, pre-calibration view. This is going to give us a snapshot of how much work needs to be done on this display. We're going to run through the grayscale, get an idea of how that's doing. It's also going to look at EOTF to see how well that's tracking. And we're also going to look at the color gamut in 3 dimensions. We've got our X and Y coordinates here for the primary and secondary colors and for white. And then our luminance numbers, our luminance readings will be down here on the gamut luminance page. So let's just take a quick run through and see where it's at. Now I do have the Klein that I'm using, which is a fairly fast meter. They're all the same, right? And that couldn't be further from the truth. When you get into some of these meters, now granted, I do understand that they're expensive. It took me years to buy a meter like this, but for me, the biggest benefit is the speed. As you guys can see how fast it's going through the different readings, but also with today's displays, OLED and some of the really good black levels we're seeing on some projectors now, and some really good black levels on some of the LCDs that have really good local dimming. I really want to be able to get good consistent readings in those really dark levels, and the Klein is awesome at that. I mean, you can see how big it is. It looks like a telescope, and there's a big giant sensor in there compared to other meters. So I understand it's expensive, but I made the jump because as many jobs as I do, you know, I want to go through as fast as possible, and I want to be able to trust those readings on the darker levels, especially if I'm building a lookup table. Of course, depending on the system I'm working on. So we're using the Klein. Let's look at the pre-calibration results. So as we look at the grayscale, we got 10, which is almost black, up to 100, which is peak white. Right at the 100 mark here, red and green track pretty well, but blue is shot up quite a bit. And for being standard picture mode, that's pretty normal. I'm not surprised to see that at all. If we look at the EOTF curve, the luminance curve throughout the grayscale, it's actually pretty good. There's a little bit of a bump right here in the mid-range, but this is probably going to be very easy to fix. We'll see. So that's not that bad. If we look over at the CIE chart, we've got green's oversaturated, so is yellow, so is red. Magenta's oversaturated and it's kind of blue. Blue's oversaturated, it's kind of purple. Cyan is almost oversaturated, but it's very blue. And the white point here is very blue. Now there's two little white dots right here. One's gray and one's white, just because when we're taking the readings of the color gamut, CalMan takes 2 samples just to give you an idea. 1 sample sometimes isn't enough data, so it does take 2. Down here at the bottom for gamut luminance, this is really crazy actually. We have a bar graph here that's showing green, blue, magenta, and yellow are all too bright. Now the graph is zoomed out really far because these errors are huge. So we're going from 50 to -50. If I wanted to dig in a little bit deeper, we can right click on that graph, go to properties, and then let's change the axis property. And that zoomed in too much. So let's do this. Let's set it ourselves. So let's say we're going to do manual, and we're going to say it was 50 to 50. So let's say -20 to 20. Let's see what happens there. See, yeah, here we go. This gives us a little bit of a zoom in, if you will, on some of the other colors here. Red's still a little bit too bright. Cyan looks like it's a little bit too dark. Green, blue, magenta, and yellow are still too bright, but this should all be fixable. Okay, we'll go back to auto for now. Okay, so a lot of work to do, but I think we'll get there pretty easily. If you guys do have any questions, let me know. I don't see any yet. Okay, so on this page, this is a really good page to use if you're trying to figure out which mode to calibrate. And I kind of break this up into really 3 things. Number 1, it's really important to find a mode that you actually can calibrate. And I know that sounds silly, but if you notice in a lot of picture modes on a lot of displays, projectors, TVs, whatever, some of the picture modes lock you out of some of the advanced settings. So if I need to fix the white balance and the white balance menu is grayed out, that's really not going to help me too much. So I do need to find a picture mode that I can calibrate. If you've done this a lot, you start to notice patterns. You know, I've dealt with Samsungs for a really long time, and you know, I usually go with movie mode or filmmaker mode on the newer ones. It's much closer out of the box. I can calibrate it and basically adjust anything I want to in those modes. If I were to measure, if I were to look in, say, vivid mode, well, let's do it since we're all here together. Let's learn a little bit about the TV. We're going to go into the picture mode, and we're going to change it to dynamic. Now let's see if we go into, let's see, color tone, cool, white balance, 2-point. Okay, so they are unlocked. Okay, cool. So we actually could do the white balance. We could attempt to do the white balance in dynamic mode if we really wanted to, but definitely not going to do that. So in this case, if we look at movie mode, it's going to have all of the settings that we need. See, there's white balance. Good. Those are all unlocked and usable. They even have a 20-point grayscale adjustment in here, which you do have to turn on if you're going to use it. We'll see if we have to use it later, and if we do have to use it, we'll see how well it works. There's a gamma adjustment here, very good. Shadow detail, this is a little confusing because if you notice on the Samsungs, they've been like this for a few years now, they have a brightness control, which traditionally is your black level, but in this case, brightness is your backlight control. Sony has done this too, actually a few years ago, and it was very confusing for about 5 minutes until we figured out what they did when they renamed these. But brightness is going to be your backlight. Contrast is, you know, contrast, sharpness, color, tint, those things are all normal. And then your shadow detail adjustment right here is your actual black level control. And for the color gamut, under color space settings, we have an auto setting, and then a native setting, and then a custom setting. Custom setting, that's going to unlock all of the adjustments we need to make the color gamut nice and pretty. Let's see what else we have here. Smart calibration, that's the whole, calibrate your TV with your phone. Not a big fan of. I know some people use it, but when you have these types of tools and software, then that's kind of unnecessary. Plus, you can't do as much as you can if you did all this stuff yourself. So after we find a picture mode that I'm happy with to calibrate, movie looks like a good one to start with. Let's measure movie mode and measure that color temperature and measure that gamma, and let's see how close it is to our actual targets. So click the read series button, and if we look here at 6500, that's where we're gonna eventually, hopefully, be for the white point. And as you can see, it's measuring about 6000 Kelvin, so it's a little on the warm side. On the gamma preset, I think it's set to 0, if I'm not mistaken. We can go in and double check that. But just reading 2 samples to get like a quick snapshot of what's going on, we come up with an average gamma of 2.4. We will see the entire grayscale's luminance changes, aka gamma, on a different page. It goes into a little bit more detail. But we know a few things about the TV already. Movie mode has everything we need. The color temperature in movie mode is a little too warm, and the gamma in that mode, it looks decent so far. You guys can probably tell by this room, there is a small window behind the TV. There are no windows behind me. I'm sitting in front of the TV behind the camera. In that case, I still don't feel comfortable doing a gamma or an EOTF of 2.4 or BT1886. This room would have to be pitch black, and I would have to be sitting exactly in the right position and distance from the screen to really feel comfortable with that. So in a room like this, we'll probably go with something like a 2.2. Now I do need to change my target to 2.2. So if we go to the settings tab right here, workflow basic options is the first tab. And I must have already done that. So our targets are D65 for the white point, BT709 because we are doing SDR. And then the gamma formula, we're doing a power law of 2.2. So those are already set to go. Also here in the luminance levels, you can see I have video checked 16 to 235 because we're doing video range and not PC range. So maybe we can get the color temperature here a little bit better. Let's see what the TV has for different color temperature settings. It might have multiple for warm. Let's see. Okay, there's warm 2, which I'm guessing there's going to be a warm 1. So let's measure warm 1. And we go to almost 7000 Kelvin. That should be so fine. We're either way too warm or a little too cool. And before we take any critical measurements and make any adjustments to the TV, we have got to make sure that stuff is turned off. So on this Samsung, at least on this model, we go down to general. There's a power and energy savings menu, and you can see the brightness optimization is turned off. That's good. Brightness reduction, we're going to turn that off so the TV doesn't get dim on us. You may have seen this on the camera. I'll take a measurement so we can see it together. But the background of that test pattern I have on the screen got much brighter just by turning that off. Screensaver, if the TV's not getting any input signal, you'll get a nice screensaver on the screen. I don't mind leaving that up there. And then auto power saving mode, I'm gonna go ahead and turn that off too. Let's see what else is down here. It tells me the battery status, and it tells us how long the TV will stay on before it'll shut itself off if it's not getting any signal. So that was good. So we're starting off in movie mode. We're starting off with the color temperature in warm 1. And what other options do we have in here for the gamma? Maybe we can get that a little bit closer to 2.2 as our starting point. Let's see. So Samsung doesn't call it gamma. What they do is they have the gamma option here, and then they have a slider underneath that. And you can see as I slide that back and forth, the entire image will get a little bit brighter or a little bit darker. I do find this a little bit confusing. This would be some feedback I would give to Samsung to take away where it says 1886. There is an option here for 2.2, and then you can adjust it from there. So you have a combination here of different gamma presets. So 2.2, 1886, ST2084, I don't know if you can see that, but it's grayed out because we're doing SDR. So let's start with a 2.2, and we'll see how the black level turns out with the shadow detail control. Let's see. All right, so the gamma set to 2.2, the color temperature set to warm 1, and the TV is in movie mode. So let's take that measurement again. Okay, we're still about 7,000 Kelvin is about 2.1 now. So we went from 2.4 to 2.1. I'd like to ideally be kind of in the middle of those two. We might be able to manipulate that a little bit better later. Also, too, this is just an average of two samples of two readings. So we might get a better idea of what the gamma is like when we look at it across the entire grayscale. So I think this is a good starting point. Check to see if there's any questions. There are no questions, and nobody so far has said they can't see my screen, so I think we are in good shape. Okay, let's go to the next page. This page is very similar to the one before in a sense that you're picking presets still. So the white point on this page, it calls out right here, the white point. We've already chosen worm 1 because that one was a little bit closer to our targets. That's been taken care of. There are options in that TV for color space. We saw that before. Now, Samsung makes it pretty darn easy to know which color space option to use. We've got custom, native, and auto. Now this is a really easy decision because check this out. If we put it in auto, the color gamut controls are completely grayed out. If we put it in native, the color gamut controls are grayed out. We put it in custom, guess what? Now we can make all the adjustments. So Samsung makes it pretty simple. If you're going to be making adjustments to the color gamut on a Samsung, just make sure to put it in custom mode. Now, other TVs aren't like that. Other TVs might have different options. They might say 709, they might say P3, they might say wide or enhanced or extended, and you don't ever really know what some of those mean. And even if they're labeled in such a way that it should make sense, you still want to measure it, right? Because it might not actually measure the way you expect it to for that setting. So right now it's in custom. Let's see how close it is. If it were too small, I would be worried because in most cases, if green is, let's say, down here somewhere, that might be as much green as that TV can do for that color gamut or that picture mode maybe. So it's really difficult and usually impossible to take an undersaturated, in this case green, and push it out like this. But if the color gamut's too big, I can usually reel it in much easier. You can think of this as headroom, right? So the fact that it's a little bit too big, I'm totally fine with that. But just for giggles, again, because we're learning this TV together, let's move over to native. I'm just curious what it's going to look like here. Now, again, it is all grayed out, so this is just me being curious on what it would read. Now, if you want to, a cool little CalMan trick is you have a history tab up here on the left. I can right-click that, rename it, and call it custom. And I can open a second tab here. I can open as many as I want. I'm just going to do 2 here. I'm going to right-click that, and I'm going to rename it native. So now we can toggle between the 2 tabs and see the difference between, in this case, custom and native. So let's go ahead and put the TV back into native. Oh, I think I actually did already. Let me just double check. Yeah, it's in native already. Okay. Let's go ahead and measure it. Now, this is the native, this is the panel's native color gamut. So without any extra processing, without any color management deployed or anything like that, this is just what the panel does naturally when you send it red, green, blue, cyan, magenta, yellow. Or how much more saturated the green is. This is a nice big color gamut. And I would be able to probably reel this in also, like we looked at before in the other mode called custom. But because in native, all those controls are grayed out, I would just be stuck with this. So I definitely know I need to use custom here. So let's put it back in custom. Now we're back in custom. I don't really need this native tab anymore. I can delete it, or I can just keep moving on. If you ever want to come back, you might want to keep it. If you ever want to come back and read some stuff again. Okay, so this page, I can't stress how important it is. And for some of you who are experienced calibrators, you already know to do this, but this page just reminds you, hey man, make sure you turn off all these automatic things that are built into the TV. So things like the ambient light sensor, things like energy savings mode, things like black level enhancer and contrast enhancer and all these things that could make the calibration not turn out as accurate as you want it to be. I call these bonus features. So let's go through, and now the good thing about movie mode, and I believe filmmaker mode on this TV as well, and this is pretty common across all brands, when you're in the mode that you're going to be calibrating, whether it's like an ISF mode on LGs or like a movie or filmmaker mode on Samsungs or like a custom mode on Sony, they do have the wherewithal to turn a lot of this stuff off for you for those modes. But there are some cases where if you're watching the TV in like standard or vivid or whatever, then all these things could be turned on. So it's not a bad idea just to go through and just make sure everything is turned off. So we'll go back into expert settings, and then let's see what we have here. Picture clarity settings. We've got an option that says custom, auto, and off. picture clarity settings on a Samsung is their motion interpolation. Some people like it, some people hate it. I am not a fan. You know, it adds extra frames into the image, and it makes the image a lot smoother than it should be. And to me, it looks super fake and kind of gives me a little bit of a not necessarily motion sickness, but it definitely throws off my spatial resolution, if you want to call that, or temporal resolution. So when things are too smooth, people are like, you know, it looks like they're on roller skates instead of walking. It just doesn't look right to me. Plus, it also adds a lot of times some distortions. But if you're trying to go for a pure picture, an accurate image, this stuff is going to get turned off. So let's go ahead and do that now while we're thinking about it and in that menu. Okay, let's see what else we have here. Contrast enhancer off. Color tone warm 1, white balance, gamma, color space is custom, and then there's a reset at the bottom. Good. So all these bonus features, and there aren't many of them in this TV, of course, but they are turned off by default in movie mode, except for the picture clarity setting. So make sure you turn that off if you'd like to turn that off. Okay, adjust luminance. Now we're going to make the TV as bright as it needs to be for the room environment. Now, one thing I want to double check here is how much light did we gain by turning off the energy savings? That's always a fun little exercise I like to see. You'd be surprised, or maybe not actually, we've measured this millions of times for years on lots of different TVs, and sometimes we see as much as a 75% loss of light output when you turn the energy savings on. You know, sure, you want to save some energy, you don't want the TV to run so bright, cool. You can turn that stuff on. But these TVs are so efficient now that I see that as a non-issue. This is really just an Energy Star thing more than anything. You know, the manufacturers pay a lot of money, and Energy Star is very involved with how much energy appliances use, TVs being one of them. And to make that Energy Star spec and to get that nice yellow Energy Star sticker on the TV or on the box or whatnot, they put these things in there. The first thing we do as calibrators and people who are setting these TVs up professionally, and even your enthusiasts who know a little bit more than the average person, they go in and they turn the stuff off right away anyway, which is always a good thing for me. So I do want to take some luminance readings as is, and we're about 310 nits, which is pretty darn bright. Let's check here how much light we lose by turning on the energy savings stuff. So back into general and then back into energy savings. Okay, so there's brightness optimization. What does that do? We go from 310 nits to, now see it's dropping. If you look at the CalMan screen, we start off about 300, it's just dropping, 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 dropping. I don't know when it's gonna stop, but we're not gonna use it, so I'm not gonna stick around and find out. Let's see, so let's turn that off. And then we have a brightness reduction. And we go from 310 nits to, wow, 167. So basically it's cut in half. So that just shows you and proves the point that the Energy Star stuff is great for the sticker, not good for the picture. So we're gonna turn that off. Wow, I don't know if you guys can notice it or not, but let me see how it shows up on the camera. Brightness reduction. Look at the white background of the TV. Oh yeah, you can visibly see it on the camera. Cool, good. All right, so that stuff is all turned off. Now, the next question we have to ask ourselves is 310 nits appropriate for this room? I'm sitting very close to the TV. Again, I'm literally right behind the camera. So I'm sitting really close to the TV, and this room is pretty darn dark. So I think 310 nits is probably way overkill. Now, just for historical, you know, just for reference, if you will, when we are calibrating SDR to the set in stone standard, it is 100 nits. So the whole argument with 100 nits is a pretty interesting one, because if you think about it, if you're in a studio environment sitting 18 inches away from a 30-inch reference monitor in a pitch black room, 100 nits is fine. You know, it's not going to burn your eyes out. And we're just stuck at 100 nits because of old CRT TVs. We are starting to see a shift from 100 nits now because the TVs are barely even turned on. TV at home. My TV at home, it's very similar. The room is very similar to this. I sit pretty close. and the room has some ambient light in it. So I have my SDR set to about 150 nits, and that seems to work out pretty well for me. So how are we going to go from 300 nits down to 150? Okay, so the meter's running, and as I'm turning the level down, we're going to be at about 150 nits with the brightness at 13. That might change. We're going to double check this number at the end of the calibration. That seems like a good starting point for now, about 150 nits or so. In CalMan, they do give you some recommendations based off room lighting. These are just recommendations. I say this all the time, but at the end of the day, you're the person that's on site. You're the person that's talking to the client and finding out, about the room and about the lighting and where they like to sit. And you sometimes have to consider the person's age. You might need to go a little bit brighter because of that. When you're not in a studio environment going for exactly 100 nits, what you're really doing is you're using your knowledge of what the TV is capable of in the room that it's in to make it the best it can be for that client in their seating position. So when you look at these recommendations over here to the left, that's all they are, is just recommendations. Here it says for a bright room, 200 nits. I'm here in Florida. I work on a lot of bright rooms. In my day modes, 200 nits is still too dim. We were 300 nits on this TV by the time we turn the energy saving stuff off. So I would be inclined, if this TV was in a bright room, to go to 310 nits and really just max it out. So again, just pointing this out, this is just recommendations. Use your judgment when you're on site. Okay, dynamic range. This is where things get fun. We're actually going to start making adjustments here. Dynamic range is the most important thing when we're talking about picture quality. It's no different than audio. And what is dynamic range for people who might be new? It's the difference between the bright and the dark. And the bigger the difference, the better. A good example I like to use in classes, because everybody kind of gets it. When you're doing your eye exam and you're looking at the chart is white and the letters are black. It's really easy to see the difference between the background and the letters. If the background of the chart was white and the letters were yellow, it'd be a lot harder to see. So just a little thing to think about there. We want as bright white as we can get, and we want as dark black as we can get, but we still want to be able to see the details in between, and that's what the brightness and contrast controls are for. So one thing I want to do is I do want to see how well white tracks from 90%. Look down here at the bottom of CalMan, you got 90% all the way up to 109. Now I can do this a few different ways. 109% of the signal is obviously more than 100%. And it might make you wonder, like, well, why would I want to read levels above 100? If you remember before, we were looking at video levels. So limited range is 16 to 235. But in the spec for SDR video, 235 is the ceiling, but there is some headroom after that. So when we measure up to 109%, we're measuring all the way out to like 253, 254, and we're just seeing if the white is clipped past 235. If it is, probably not that big of a deal, right? Because if you're watching anything recorded, especially a movie, those things are not mastered past level 235. But there are some instances where you want to see it. If I do want to measure all the way out to 253, 254, I can leave it at clipping with peak white, or I can change this to just clipping. And you notice now that we're only going to read these levels from 90 up to 100, 100% of the signal being digital level. Let's see how well it tracks. So there's a lot of weird stuff going on here. If this were tracking correctly, this yellow line is the target, and we would ideally want red, green, and blue to track parallel to that line. They're not smushed together yet because we haven't done the white balance, but let's look at how it's tracking. So yellow is the target. Green tracks pretty well. I don't know how well you guys can see this, but green tracks really well. Red tracks kind of okay, and then right around 95. And blue just looks like it just keeps going forever. So let's think about what this looks like to the actual picture. There's going to be extra blue throughout the entire grayscale. Now this, again, starts at 90%, but if we were to measure it all the way down to 10%, there's a good chance that this blue is just in this kind of perpetual incline right here. Red does start to clip at around 95%. So if you think about this, if blue goes all the way up and green goes all the way up, but red dies, what's blue plus green? Blue plus green is cyan. So if we look at a grayscale pattern right now, or even the contrast pattern, some of the white boxes might look kind of like a cyan color. So let's see. We're gonna pull up the contrast menu. I'm sorry, we're gonna pull up the contrast pattern by clicking the contrast button. We'll let the Samsung take a second to resync. And oh, this is actually pretty interesting. My predictions were a little off, but there still is something wrong. You guys should be able to pick this up on camera because I can see it in the camera on my end, but the boxes throughout the entire range are all kind of pink. And it's really apparent when you look at the bottom row and the middle row. And if you look at the very top row, I can see up to about 252 or 253. Based on what you're seeing on the camera, you might only be able to see up to about 254. I'm sorry, about 246, somewhere right around in there. But point being is that the picture is very pink right now. So if we're watching hockey or anything with a lot of white in it, it's going to look kind of pink. Now that's a very easy fix. All we're going to do here is lower the contrast. It's at 45 from the factory. I'm going to come down to 44, 43, 42, 41, 40. Okay, the pink is starting to go away. 39, 38. Okay, 38, the pink is gone. If I keep coming down, I'm not getting anything any better. I'm just making the picture darker and less dynamic, which is obviously no good. Just for giggles, let's crank it all the way up to max. Okay, yeah, it goes crazy. So really, from 50 down to 45, there's not a huge difference. But when you go from 45 down to 39, now we have a nice neutral white in the contrast pattern. Let's take a look at black level, and we'll kind of look at the same thing. Okay, black level. Let's change one setting on the generator. And we're going to be looking at the black level in video range, not full range. So let the Samsung resync, and let's change the Murideo for black level back over to limited range. Stand by. You should see the background get darker. And sure enough, that looks correct. Okay, now the camera is at a slight angle compared to the TV. Also, this is kind of funny. Through the camera, it does look like there's a whole heck of a lot of blue in those gray boxes. That's just the camera. I do not see that in real life. But what I do want to see in real life is the upper left box is labeled 17D. So you go 17, 18, 19, 20. In real life, I can see box 17 just barely, which is good. That's your first shadow out of black. Remember, the range is 16 to 235. So 17 is the first level out of black in 8-bit. So we want to be able to see 17. You can't see it on the camera. I can see it in real life. You can also look at the 17 rectangle in the middle of the screen too. It looks to me like it's very visible on the camera, but again, I can see it straight on, no problem. I can barely see it, which is kind of the goal. Just so you can see what this control does. Let's find the shadow detail control. And if you turn the black level up, the picture gets washed out. Turn the black level down, and now we're crushing the black. We can't see any shadows. So funny enough, in this room, where I'm sitting, I can just barely see 17 with the shadow detail control at 0. That's good. So we had to bring down the contrast a few clicks, and we were able to leave the black level control alone. Good. Now, since we turned the contrast down and maybe fix some of these color shift issues, let's take that reading again, and let's see how well it tracks. Much, 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 much better. Okay, this is something I can work with. Before, it was a total mess, and we tried to white balance what we had before, it would have been a total nightmare. Now notice something here too. We're down to 144 nits. So by lowering the contrast like 6 clicks or whatever it was, we've lost like 10 nits. So this is why it's so important to double check these things at the end. These controls and these adjustments we're making in the middle of the process can affect the end result. So I could either turn that backlight up a little bit here, or I can wait till the end. I'm just gonna wait till the end. Doesn't matter either way. So I'm happy with the black level. I'm happy with the overall luminance, and I'm happy with the contrast once I made the adjustment. Let's go to the next page. See if there's any questions, and no questions yet. Okay, cool. If you guys have any, feel free, let me know. Okay, so when we looked at the preset modes at the beginning, remember when we looked at the gamma and the average was about a 2.1, just reading these two samples, 60% white and then peak white at 100%. Let's see what the gamma is actually doing throughout the entire grayscale. We'll go back to the gamma page. Down at the bottom, you have 10 to 100. There's your grayscale. This yellow line is our target. So ideally, when I take these measurements, my measurements are going to follow this yellow line as close as possible. So let's see what happens. And it's gone. Okay, so what's happening here? So at the very beginning of the grayscale and up until about the halfway point, the TV is tracking above the yellow line. Now, what does this actually mean? The thing about gamma that confuses everybody, whether you're new or not, is that the gamma value is inverse of what's actually happening to the picture. In other words, if the gamma value is high, then that part of the picture is too dark. So it's a little bit backwards what you might think. So for the first half of the grayscale, it's a little too dark, but the second half of the grayscale is way too bright. So we start off at about 60% white and it nosedives all the way down to about 90 and then kind of pops back up at about 100. Remember, 100 is the reference point. So this big line right here isn't that much of a concern. What I'm worried about is this big, almost S-shaped curve right here. I'm not particularly happy with that, but I don't know if we can fix it. Let's see. Oh, I think there may have been one question here. Let's double check. Oh, is the dark spot on the left of the screen an artifact because of the camera? Thank you for asking that. That's a great call out. And now that I'm looking at a pure gray screen, I do not see that in real life. That is because of the camera angle, and probably it's the way it's just catching the backlight. It does look like a big splotch. There is a little bit of uniformity issues around the edges of the panel, which I think you probably can see in real life. I'm sorry, on the camera and in real life. And then there is a little bit of a weird kind of smudge in the bottom left. But that big giant dark smudge that you see in the kind of the upper left there, that is because of the camera, but good call out. Thank you for asking. And I just want to see how the gamma is tracking on every level. So I just want to change it to 1886. And I want to keep track of my readings. So let's open up a second tab. We're going to right click it, rename it 1886. Okay, now let's see how well that tracks. My prediction is that it's still going to crisscross right in the middle. So let's see. We went from a 2.2 to a 2.4, and here it goes. Okay, so this might not be fixable. Now, there are some other tricks we could try. Let's make sure. Now, this TV doesn't have local dimming, so it's not a local dimming problem. And this could just be the TV's natural behavior. So if we go to 2.2, there is a slider. So let's take that slider to +5, and let's just see what happens. This is the great thing about this, guys, is that you can experiment and you're not going to break anything. So as you're learning a TV for the first time, you know, go through, measure everything. Get very intimate with it. Same shape. So not really any improvement there. Now let's go to the other extreme. Now again, the shadow detail acts like a black level control. So the last thing you want to do is try to manipulate the gamma with the black level control, but I don't know if it's going to help or not. I'm just curious at this point. Ideally, the gamma would track nice and straight. A lot of times, we talked about those bonus features, as I like to call them at the beginning. A lot of times you'll see these things like contrast enhancer, or I don't know, every manufacturer calls it their own kind of funky little thing, but a lot of times if that stuff is turned on, you can cause these errors too. But I'm not really seeing any improvement going on here. So I think what we're going to have to do is just leave the shadow detail at 0 so we can see all of our black levels and whatnot. We might just have to be stuck with that curve and leave it at 2.2. Again, we don't typically want to use the black level control to manipulate the gamma. You can run into all kinds of weird issues with crushing and whatnot. This might be fixable somewhere else in the menu, and that is the white balance menu. Now, it might sound kind of weird that you can fix a luminance problem with the white balance control, but let's think about it for a second. If we go into that white balance control, let's go all the way down. There's a 2-point, which is very standard, and then there's a 20-point. We're going to turn that on. Now, the intervals go from 5 in increments of 5s all the way up to 100. And what that means is I can adjust the grayscale at every single one of these points. So you can think about it like, if you're an audio person, you can think about it like this. The 2-point white balance control is like bass and treble, and that's all you got, right? You turn the bass up or down, you turn the treble up and down, but maybe you're not happy with the mid-range. But you only have bass and treble, so you're stuck. You throw in an equalizer, now you can adjust the gain for individual bands, if you will, individual frequencies. And that's exactly what the 20-point white balance control is for. So I have a bass and treble with my 2-point, and I have a full equalizer with the 20-point. Now, let's see if this is actually going to work. If you look in CalMan, I'm just going to use point number 40 as a reference. So point number 40, we want it to be at 2.2. It's really about a 2.3. Now let's think about this for a second. If I wanted to make 40% signal brighter or darker, how could I possibly do that? Some TVs will give you a gain control in the 20 or the 10-point white balance system. The Samsung doesn't, but let's think about this. What 3 colors make up white and gray in the grayscale? It's red, green, and blue. So the TV does have red, green, and blue adjustments for every single one of these levels. So if we go to level 40, we're just going to pick 40%. If I raise red 10 clicks, and then green 10 clicks, and then blue 10 clicks, I just made 40% gray brighter than what it was. And I don't know if this actually worked, but that's the idea. So I'm gonna go back to CalMan, I'm gonna click 40. And in this case, I'm just gonna hit the play button, just a single read to see if it made any difference. So watch this gray line above 40. Okay, cool, it helped. See how it dipped down a little bit there? So I can keep going through and keep massaging this and eventually get this line to be nice and flat. But what I do wonder is what happens down here. There wasn't that big of a discrepancy. So making those adjustments, red 10, green 10, blue 10, dropped it down a bit. This is so far out of whack, I don't know if this is fixable. We're gonna have to probably send those controls to their limits. But let's just try. Do 80%, and then we're gonna look for this gray line right here. Out of red, green, and blue, which color are we more sensitive to? Green, right? So I'm gonna pick the green control for 80% gray and turn it up. Am I seeing any green towards the top of the grayscale? And as you can probably see on camera, yep, you sure can. I've got some really weird, funky green and yellow going on there towards the top end. So this is a good sign. That means the control does something. Now, how well it works, that's another story. So let's try to adjust 80% and see what happens. Now, if 80% is down here around 1.9 on the gamma, I want to get it to 2.2. So where we made 40% brighter, I have to make 80% darker. And the goal here is to level out this gray line, which is the measurements, and match them up to the yellow line, which are the targets. So we can also do this in real time. So if you click the continuous button in CalMan, you can kind of see how things are going in real time. So let's take the green control, let's come down 10 clicks. The red control, come down 10 clicks. And it does look like it made a difference. If you guys take a look at CalMan, 80% went from like way down here at about a 1.8, 1.9 up here closer to the 2.2 target. So this is actually a really good sign. And I have to make, I have to give Samsung props on this because one of the gripes that the calibrators have had with Samsungs for a long time is that the 20-point white balance controls just didn't work, or they worked pretty poorly. Very bottom of the grayscale or the very top of the grayscale and work down or work up. That way I'm not bouncing around and measuring different levels. I can kind of keep track of myself in that way. So let's start with 10. Now look at 10, it is barely off. I don't know if it's gonna do anything here, but we're already here. If you guys are into cars, I'm a big car guy. And anytime you're fixing something in the car, it's like this. Well, I'm already in here, I might as well change this other thing too. So we're already here, let's see what happens. So 10%, so let's brighten it a little bit. Let's just go like 5 clicks. 2, 3, 4, 5 red, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 green, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 blue. And if we look over at 10 here, didn't really move. And I don't want to push it too hard. A lot of times on these TVs, if you make these wild giant adjustments, it causes a lot of weird like banding artifacts in the picture. So on paper, it might look like it's working, and then you actually look at content and yeah, not so much. And let's get red, green, and blue back up to 20, and you can see now 10 is a little bit tighter. Let's do the same thing with 20. Now we went 20 clicks on 10%. I'm gonna predict that we go 20 clicks. Now we could do 15% too. By the way, while we're here, we might as well point this out. In CalMan, the default setting for the gamma and the grayscale is a 10-point adjustment. If I want to look at increments of 5s, I can go to the settings wheel up here. First tab is workflow basic options, grayscale points. Right now it's set to 10. Again, that's the default. We go down here to 21 points. Now we have increments of 5s. So now if you look at the bottom, CalMan, 0, 5, 10, 15, 20, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, all the way up to 100. Okay, let's see here, just curious how the 20-point measures. We've already made some adjustments, so don't be surprised if you got some levels here that are kind of weird. Okay, good. 10 looks good. And then we also played with 80. So see, there's a little hump right here. So you can see that these adjustments we've been making are actually doing something. Another question came in. Thank you for that. I think the 20-point grayscale does not work in HDR mode. I'm pretty sure you're right on that one. There's a lot of TVs out there where the advanced controls do not work in HDR. And the reason is you're pushing in HDR, you're pushing the TV so hard that the adjustments just don't work. Or sometimes some manufacturers will disable the adjustments, but they don't gray them out in the menu. So you're looking through the menu and you're like, oh, cool, great, I've got these adjustments. And then you go to actually make the adjustments and you're going up and down all the way and nothing's actually changing. And I believe that's the case for HDR on this TV. If anything, they might just work. Think of it this way. Here's a good way to put it. Another audio analogy for you. If you have the volume turned up so much that the system is clipping, why bother EQing it if it's clipping, right? So if you're pushing the TV really hard to its limits and then you try to, in this case, quote unquote, equalize it, you're going to run into a lot of problems. So kind of our traditional recommendation for HDR is to not really mess with the white balance adjustments if you can help it. Now, there's going to be some cases where you can make some minor adjustments and it is going to help. But when you have these extreme cases where the controls don't work at all, or they work, they're too sensitive. In other words, you go up one click and it makes a giant difference. The controls are not maybe granular as much as we want them to. It's best to just leave that stuff alone. And we see it also in the color gamut, by the way. And, you know, you remember these things over the years. Somebody called me recently, and he was a calibrator. I think he was out in Vegas somewhere, but he's like, hey, I'm working on this LG OLED, and the color management settings are just making things like worse. And I said, what's the model number of the TV? And he said, oh, it's a 65B6. So it's a 2016 model. And for those of you who've been around for a while and you remember those TVs, the color management menu was there and everything was unlocked, but it did not work. So you would make your adjustments and it caused all these posterization issues. So sometimes it's a little discouraging, but sometimes there are controls in the TV that just don't work and you just have to kind of live with it. Now, I must give you this tip. If you're making these adjustments and they are making things worse or not making any improvements, my recommendation is to put those settings back to their factory positions. And here's why. Let's say, for example, we're adjusting the grayscale here and we're trying to get the gamma right. And I go for 10% gray, I go plus 20 on red, plus 20 on green, plus 20 on blue. So I've made 20 clicks up for red, green, and blue for level 10. And let's say it doesn't do anything. And I go, okay, well, I'm turning these things up and down, nothing's happening. Okay, they obviously don't work, I'm gonna move on to my next thing. What happens if tomorrow Samsung puts out a firmware update and now all of a sudden those controls do work? So you've left red, green, and blue up to plus 20, and now you've got all kinds of weird issues in the picture. So if you're not going to use a control or it's not working, just leave it at its factory position, leave it alone. Okay, let's see if we can do a little bit more work here. So we fixed 10. Let's see what we can do here to 15. I'm just gonna run the meter continuous so I can see what happens here in real time. We did 20 clicks on 10%. Let's go to on. And we did 20 clicks, red, green, and blue on 15%. And you guys can see how it sort of dropped down into place here. Let's go to 20%. As you guys can probably get the idea now, this is a lot of just back and forth. Now, what's really nice about some of the TVs that have the, what's usually referred to as auto cal, is these real tedious adjustments we're making here manually, they're done for you. But we're not doing auto cal on this TV, so let's just do everything manually. So it looks like 20 clicks on level 20 was pretty good. There's still a little bit of a raise right here. Let's go to maybe like 25. There we go, it's starting to flatten out a little bit more now. Okay, cool. Let's go to 25%. Now guys, I do want to mention this also, as we're making these adjustments. You see here this big spike, the meter caught the menu. So let's stop, Just take a quick reading of 20, and then take a single reading of 25. We'll get this stuff. Oh, hey there, Mr. Jason, take the menu off the screen. That would help. Okay, so 20%, we'll do a single read. 25% we'll do a single read, and 25% is a little dark. So we're probably going to do the same 20 or 25 clicks. Now, once I get a few of these levels done, I really have to look at something other than a test pattern of a plain white patch on the screen or a plain gray patch on the screen. The last thing I want to do is do all of this work and these controls make the grayscale completely, out of whack. So after I make this adjustment at 25, let's see what the actual image looks like. So we're going to go 20 clicks on red, 20 clicks on green, and it looks like, let's see if that worked. Might as well just run the meter continuous here. Okay, cool, it worked. Okay, let's get to the next level. Actually, let's go 25. I can probably flatten that out just a little bit more. Again, guys, we are learning this one together. So if these controls don't work, don't blame the messenger. Okay, we're gonna go 30%. And same as before, it's too dark. So let's go the full 25 clicks. Okay, so that helped. Let's go to 35. The other thing I have to give Samsung props for here is, for the longest time, one of the biggest complaints from all the calibrators with Samsung TVs was that your readings were different if you were in the menu or out of the menu, even if the menu was not in the middle of the screen like it is right now, right in front of the light meter. So in other words, if you press the enter button, the adjustment slides down to the bottom of the screen, but the background of the screen with that menu up would still dim the background. So you couldn't trust your readings while you were making the adjustments on the fly. It's kind of frustrating. So you had to take your readings, stop the meter, go into the menu, make the adjustment, stop the meter, exit the menu, take another reading. And it was just like this in and out and in and out and in and out. It was just really frustrating and took way too much time. Luckily, they have done a much better job at that on these new ones. Just FYI, in case you ever do encounter any, Vizios are the same way, and I don't think they've fixed it on those models, but I don't see too many Vizios, so I'm not sure. So on a Vizio TV or maybe an older Samsung, take some readings with the menu on the screen and off the screen and see if they match each other. If the readings are off, then you know you're going to have to take the readings. That means you can only trust the readings that are outside of the menu, which is kind of a pain, but it is what it is. Okay, so we're at 35%. That looks pretty good. Let's go to 40, and then by the time we do 40, 45, 50, then we'll go look at a grayscale pattern and see if we did good or if we did damage. So I always pass that white balance menu. Okay, we're gonna go to 40%. And same story as before. Oops, did I already? 40%, okay. Ooh. At 40%. There we go. Get it nice and flat. There we go. Okay. Now let's try 45. Meter's running continuous, and let's do the same thing. Let's go about 20 clicks. You should be able to see it drop in real time. Okay, so that is 45%. And then let's do 50, and then we'll look at some other test patterns to make sure that we're not breaking stuff. Because I'm very good at breaking things. But the good thing about this is, guys, there is a picture reset button at the bottom. So if you do break something, not the end of the world, hit reset, start over. you know, back in the early days, for me at least, when everything was done in the service menu, the service menu readings were different than outside of the service menu readings. The service menu is not labeled like this, so you have to know where to go and know sometimes like Panasonic plasmas, the white balance controls were at hex. So you had to like just push up or down and just guess which way to go. You kind of figure it out yourself, but let's see what happens here with 50. Okay, that seems to at least work. So let's go to that 25, 25, and 25. Now that was too much. Look now at 50. See, it sort of dips. So we made too much of an adjustment. Instead of 25 clicks, let's try 20. And then boom, that's much better. Still, that dip is still there. So let's go down to like 17. There we go. Now 50 is right on the money. Okay, now let's stop the meter. I don't want to go from 50 to 100 if it's not working correctly. It's a big waste of time. So I'm going to pull up a 16-step grayscale pattern, and we're going to look at the first half of it and see if it looks neutral. If it looks like Skittles or a rainbow, then we got to reset those controls and move on to the next thing. Okay, cool. I will tell you guys, the camera does not reflect what I'm seeing with my eyes. The first half of the grayscale is a very nice neutral gray. I don't see any pink. I don't see any cyan. I don't see any blue. It all looks neutral. So this is really good. Hats off to Samsung on this. Again, in years past, these controls did not work that well, or they didn't work at all. And they're working on this model, and they're working very well. So hats off to Samsung. This is cool. Okay, let's keep going. 55. This is good. We're kind of hitting our rhythm now. I can see why people like this, right? Like for a lot of us out there, you know, calling ourselves perfectionists and things like that, you know, this is one of those things that you learn. If you are a perfectionist, you can spend lots and lots and lots and lots of time here, as you can imagine. So we're going to raise 55%, 10 clicks each. And that looks to be about, there's still a little bit of a dip. Let's go 7. Okay, that looks pretty good. We're on the money. Let's move up to 60. The other thing that these TVs are notorious for, when I say these TVs, I don't mean to pick on Samsung here, but a lot of TVs, I should say. If you guys watched the Hisense video I did, it's probably been 2 years now. That TV, with the contrast at its factory position, was adding in pink, kind of like the Samsung was doing. So on the Hisense, naturally, like we did on the Samsung, you lower the contrast a few clicks and the pink goes away. Cool. So later down the line on the Hisense, we're going through, we're trying to do the 20-point white balance, and I'm noticing that if I'm adjusting, say, 50%, the 50% measurement isn't changing. So I'm going to 50%, I'm adding red, green, and blue, 10 clicks each or 50 clicks each, going all the way up, all the way down, trying to figure this thing out. And the levels were just not, the white balance controls were just not working. And sometimes we see this. And in this case with the Samsung, this is not the case, so this is good. But sometimes, and this is just a tip for you to remember, if the grayscale controls are not working, put the contrast back at the factory position and the numbers will line up again. So think of it like this. If you lower the contrast a few clicks, and what we're doing right now in the Samsung, I want to adjust only 60%. With the contrast lowered on the Hisense and older Samsungs, I've seen this a lot too, when you were adjusting, let's say 60%, it was really adjusting 50. And when you were adjusting 50%, it was really adjusting 40. So we kind of had to figure out by experimenting that in that case, all the 20-point white balance controls were like one step off from each other. Hope that makes sense. But when we put the contrast back to the factory position, everything lined up again. The problem was with the contrast in the factory position, it left a whole bunch of pink and white, and you couldn't white balance it out because there was so much. So it was like, okay, well, what do I do? Do I fiddle with the grayscale for 2 hours and try to figure out which levels are which? Or do I just stick with the 2-point, lower the contrast a little bit, and just call it a day? Just out of experience, if I were to give any advice on this, it is really, really, really easy to go down the rabbit hole, and it's very, trust me, I've been there myself. It's very frustrating because you have this TV, you have these settings, you have these adjustments and this great menu, but the controls don't work the way they're supposed to. It can be very frustrating. So what I tell people all the time, I've gotten phone calls before from other calibrators. They're like, hey man, I'm at this job. I'm just, I've been working on this TV for like 3 hours. It's driving me crazy. And I'm like, why didn't you call me 2.5 hours ago? You don't need to spend that much time. Just give me a ring. That's what I'm here for. So rather than sit there and fight it and fight it and fight it and fight it and fight it, just do what you can. Use what works. Okay, we landed at 65%, and I think that's the adjustment I have on the TV right now. It sure is. And what's wrong with it? It is too bright, but only by a little bit. Let's darken it, 5 clicks each. Oop, maybe a little too much, maybe 3 clicks each. Okay, that looks pretty good. 60, oh, that's 65. I need to go more. Let's see here, let's see what it does if we, there it goes. Okay, yeah, we were in a pretty good spot. That's the other thing to do, guys, if you just kind of saw what I just did. Instead of saying like, oh, maybe it's 10 clicks, 20 clicks, 25 clicks, watch the 65% line. If I just hammer on it, you know which way you're supposed to go, right? I went up, which made the line go down. Now I'm going down on the controls, making the line go back up. So if you're kind of like not sure which way to go, again, you're not going to break it. Push buttons, hold them down, floor the button. See what it does. All right, let's move on to 70%. And like the others, it's going to be too bright. Let's come down to 5 clicks each. Not enough. Okay, let's go down 10 clicks each. So I got -10, -10, -10. Oops, let's go back here. And boom, falls in line. Very good. Let's keep plugging away here. We're going to go to 75. Let's go down about 10 clicks each, red, green, and blue. Boom. Let's go to 80%. And 80% is too bright. Let's go 20 clicks on that one. Maybe too much. Let's go 15. Okay, that looks pretty good. Now there's still a little bump here at 75, and that could have just been me fat fingering the remote. Let's just check 75 one more time. It looks like 75 is still a smidge bright. So let's go down to like -15 for 75. Let's just go -10. Yeah, go -12, -12, -12. That's nice and flat. Okay, 80, I think we were happy with, right? Okay, cool. 85, just like the others, it's too bright. Let's go 15 clicks each. Okay, see the line is starting to rise over the yellow line, so we might have to do it before and go 12 clicks instead of 15. And 13 clicks. Oops. Yeah, that seems to do it. Okay, almost there. Let's go 90. So we're doing about 12 clicks on the others. Maybe a little too much. Let's do -10 on each. -11 on each. Okay, that seems to do it. There's still a little bit of a dip here at 85. I'm just being insanely picky at this point, but we're already here. Might as well do it. Okay, just a smidge too bright. Let's go down to -14. There we go. Okay. 90, I think we were happy with, and 95 should be the final level here. And like the others, it's going to be too bright. Let's go 12 clicks each, red, green, blue. Oh, way too much. See how it jumped a lot? This is what I'm talking about when I said earlier about the controls being like super sensitive. 12 clicks on every other level did it, but 12 clicks on 95 was way too much. So let's see, -7. Heck, that might not even be. Let's go -3. Okay, that's too much. That's 3, 3, and 0. Okay, so let's go 5. So that's -5, red, green, and blue. Okay, not enough. Let's go -6, -7, -7, -7. Tiny little hump there, but I'm not going to lose any sleep over that. Yeah, see, it's funny. It's like -6. Comes in a little hot. Yeah, I think that's going to be good enough for right now. Okay, cool. That looks awesome. You guys can see, I mean, we were talking as we were going and things like that, but this could very easily be a 20, 30-minute ordeal. So you really just have to think about, you know, should I use the 20-point controls or not? Well, how bad is it, right? And how critical is this calibration? If this were a monitor being used like in a production or studio or something of that nature, or on-site production, I probably wouldn't want to spend this much time and go through and nail it. But if this is for somebody's house, again, this is a Samsung frame TV. This could be a TV in somebody's, you know, hallway, you know. So getting like super critical with some of these levels and spending a whole bunch of time might not be worth it. So again, I said this before, but at the end of the day, you know your client, you know the job site, you know the room, you know the lighting, you know, make the judgment call as you're on site. Okay, cool. Looks like the question may have come in. Oh, Jeff says that he joined late. Maybe I missed it. Is there a reason for the 100% window versus 50% window? Jeff, I think you're referring to the size of the test pattern. Just give me a thumbs up or a yes if that's what you mean. I think it is. Okay, correct. Yeah. So this is an LCD TV with no local dimming. So you can literally use whatever size test patterns you'd like to. I'm just using 100% because that's what I picked. If this TV did have local dimming, there's a few choices you have to make. And number one is, do I want to use the local dimming? In most cases on today's TV, you're going to want to. The local dimming on LCDs has gotten so much better in the last few years. Now, the problem is if you're using a 10% window in the middle of the screen, the local dimming algorithm kicks in and really doesn't know what to do. Think of how many movies you watch where there's a bright white image and a black background. So the local dimming can't calculate, and the background goes dim, it goes bright, and the TV is like trying to adjust itself on the fly. So in that case, what you can do in CalMan, let's go over to the generator tab. Right here, if we look at the window size, you have a bunch of different options here. what you might want to consider doing for a TV with local dimming, and you're going to use the local dimming, is there's a few options down here that say constant APL, so constant average picture level, and then 10, 18, 25, 50. So these are the sizes. Average picture level basically means this. Let's do this. I'm going to turn on APL 10, and then we're going to click on level 25. Now, if you look at level 100, black background, white test pattern, right? If I go down to 50, I've got a 50% gray test pattern, but a dark gray background of that test pattern. So what's happening is now I'm filling the screen all the way up with something, but I'm taking my measurements from the middle of the screen. So if the background is not zero stimulus, then the local dimming doesn't try to kick in and try to correct itself. So this was also a big thing for plasmas. If you're ever working on a plasma, some of us, not me anymore, but a lot of people out there still have their plasmas and they still love them, and I don't blame them. They're cool TVs. I finally got rid of mine a couple of years ago. It was just sitting in my old office, not really doing anything, so I gave it to a friend who was in need of a TV. But if you do happen to work on a plasma, you definitely want to use the constant APL pattern, because on the plasma, they do have some burn-in protection that in a weird way kind of works like local dimming. So yeah, that's why I use 100%, because it's a non-local dimming TV and it really doesn't matter. Hope that answers your question. Let me know if there's any follow-ups. Let me go back to full 100. Okay, now we made all these adjustments to the grayscale, and we looked earlier at a grayscale pattern, and the first half of the grayscale pattern looked pretty good, right? We were looking at basically 0 to 50. Let's look at the pattern again, and I hope my eyes match the measurements. All right, let's move on. The grayscale looks good on paper, and the grayscale looks good to my eyes, so I think we're safe to move on from here. Okay, the color decoder. Now, this is a very old school thing. We don't really have to adjust this much anymore, and this is your basic color and tint controls, something we've seen on our TVs since most of us were children. On this particular TV, and we've seen this a lot in the past, you rarely, I mean rarely, have to touch the color and tint controls anymore. If anybody has a different experience, put it in the chat box. I'd be curious to hear your experiences. But for about 10 years now, I would say, the color and tint control, if you have to touch them, it's very lightly. I don't ever see myself going more than 1 or 2 clicks on either one if I have to make any adjustments to them at all. I'll give you one example of a Panasonic plasma from years and years and years ago. The SMPTE bars, or if you looked at skin tones, either way, nothing looked right until you had the tint control 9 clicks into green, which felt really weird to do, but just the way that TV was, you had to do that to get the skin tones look right. But that's an extreme example. I haven't seen anything like that in a really long time. So what I typically do is I typically do skip the color and tint page, but I do want to make sure I look at something just to make sure that skipping it's not gonna cause any damage. So I can click on the color and tint controls and get the SMPTE bars right there on the screen. The SMPTE bars, if you're not used to looking at them, are a little bit tough. I like to look at the red bar when I'm adjusting the color control, and I look at the yellow bar when I'm adjusting the tint control. But what you can also do is look at some skin tones if you're not familiar with the SMPTE bars quite yet. So if we pull up the different page, let's pull up the, oh, they're not presets. Okay, I'm gonna go to the generator and pull it up manually. Bear with me. And we're gonna look at the portrait display family, and we're going to look at it in video range. So let's see what the camera picks up. I'm sure it's going to be, oh wow, yeah, the camera has everything like totally blown out. Trust me, it does not look like that in real life. The skin tones look really good. They look really neutral. Everybody looks okay. Nobody's glowing. I don't see any lobsters on the screen. Nobody looks too pale and sick. So in this case, I'm not going to touch the color tint control at all. Now the good news is if the colors are off in any way, we're still going to be able to fix them when we do the color management menu here in the next few pages here. So after the color and tint, we're going to go on to the next page, and that's going to be your resolution and your pixel mapping. So there's 2 adjustments I'm going to look for here. I want to make sure the aspect ratio is correct on the TV, and I also want to make sure that things like overscan are turned off, and I want to make sure that the sharpness is set correctly. Having the sharpness too high is a bad thing, which might sound weird to a beginner. Too much sharpness is too much edge enhancement, and that really makes the picture look really harsh. The edges are too sharp. So, instead of looking at an image and it has nice, soft, normal edges, you're looking at like maybe a tree. The tree looks super distorted because every edge of every leaf on that tree has edge enhancement, and it just makes things look really good. Really not good, I should say. The other thing that really screws you up if the sharpness is too high, it actually hurts the contrast too. So if I'm looking at some dark gray on the screen, and let's say I'm looking at like text on the screen and it's dark gray, and I have edge enhancement around every single number and letter that's on that screen, now the edges of all those letters are like a white. So I'm adding a bunch of luminance into the image, and I'm adding a bunch of edge enhancement into the image. So the edges are going to look overly sharp, it's going to look distorted, and you're going to lose contrast at the same time. So it's really important to get these two things correct. Now, the really good news is very easy adjustment. So the first thing I want to look at here is the ISF geometry pattern. There's lots of geometry patterns. This one just works out really well. It's very simple. And as I'm looking at the image right now, there's a couple of things that I'm noticing. At the very top, bottom, left and right of the test pattern, I don't know how well this will show up on camera because they're teeny tiny, but there are very small lines at the edges of each one of these. This makes a big diamond, right? So they come to a point, here, here, down at the bottom and on the left. And they come to a nice point. If the TV's zoomed in too far or the overscan's turned on or something like that, you'll actually chop the tip of that diamond off. And just so you can see what it looks like, here's what's really interesting about Samsung. It says picture size 16:9, and it's a 16:9 screen. So you think that's right, and it's not always right. You gotta be careful here. Samsung has something called fit to screen, and right now it's set to auto. If we turn it on, it stays the same. So the auto works, cool. But watch if we turn it off. See how it zooms in? On, off, on, off. So if you leave that off, you're literally chopping off the top, bottom, left, and right, and the sides and the top and bottom of the picture. So you're chopping things off. And then also what really stinks about this is the pixels from, in this case, the test pattern, but it could be a show or whatever, the pixels don't line up with the pixels on the display. And that can cause some really soft edges and it almost looks like the camera might be out of focus. So you really want to make sure the pixels are lined up with each other. And how you do that on a Samsung is you put it in 16:9 and turn the fit to screen on. And that's all you have to do. Now, we also have to adjust the sharpness, which in movie mode on this TV is already at 0. That's a good thing. Now, I don't know how well you guys are going to be able to see this, maybe not at all, but I just want to show you, attempt to show you what happens if the sharpness is too high. So if you look at all these like tiny little lines in here, you'll see them get super distorted. You can kind of see it on camera. Interesting. Okay, cool. But on this particular TV, and this is very common for Samsungs, for no edge enhancement, the sharpness needs to be at 0. And there's a lot of other TVs that are like that too. So it seems a little counterintuitive to turn the sharpness down all the way, but turning the sharpness down all the way does give you a sharper picture. I know it sounds weird, but that's just the way it is. Okay, cool. That looks awesome. Everything's mapped correctly. Okay, now let's take a look at the grayscale and see if it needs any work. Now we got the gamma right before with those controls, but let's see if gray is actually gray. D65 gray, I should say. So let's take a quick reading. Let's see what happens. Okay, so far there's not enough green, which is an easy fix. And boom, cool. If we look through the whole grayscale, now this actually looks worse than it really is. A few pages ago, we looked at the graph and we zoomed it in and zoomed it out, looked at it a few different ways, and you can kind of look at it this way too. So look at the range here. We're 110 down to 90, so it's not a very big range. In other words, the graph is really zoomed in right now. So the errors, although they're small, they look big because the graph is zoomed in. If you want to get a better look at it, right click, go to properties, change that back to fixed axis. It's going to zoom out now from 120 to 80. and the errors are starting to look less and less, but they're still there, right? So I've got too much blue, too much red, not enough green. Let's see if we can make this any better. So the TV also has the 2-point adjustment. And let's try that first. So I want to pick a level that's towards the top, but not peak-wise. Let's just say 80. And you can see on this graph that it's a little bit too blue. In fact, we can right-click on that graph and zoom it also. There we go. We zoomed out a little bit. Doesn't look as bad because really it's not. In fact, if we want to get really nerdy, we can look at the coordinates. So 80%, the coordinate for 80 is 308, 310. So let's think about what the target is. It's 313. This is 308. 329 on Y, and this is 310. So it's not that far off. And if you look at the little dot here, this is the CIE chart, like super zoomed in. So normally you have green up here, red over here, blue down here, and then the secondary colors, cyan, magenta, and yellow. This is D65 perfect white. This is where we're actually measuring 80% at. So you can look at this two different ways. If we go to work on the grayscale, if I add green, the dot's going to go straight up and still not be enough red. If I take away blue, the dot's going to go this way. So we're still not going to hit the target. But what if I took away a little bit of red and added a little bit of green? Or if I took away a little bit of blue and then took away a little bit of red? I want to get the dot in the hole. And it should be pretty easy on this TV. So far, all the controls have been working really well. So you guys tell me while I'm going to that menu, what would you guys do? Would you fiddle with red and green or blue or all three or just green? Tell me what you would do. Okay. I am going to take out a little bit of blue and see where that puts me. Just take out some. Now, right now I'm watching the RGB balance graph. See, blue is dropping. And look at the dot. It's doing exactly what I thought it would. It's going right to the right, east of that box. So now, we just have to lower some red. And now we're pretty close. See how these sort of pinched into each other? So now we have the appropriate amount of red, green, and blue, at least at 80, because that's what we're measuring right now. Nice even bar, the dots in the hole, and 313, 329. That is a bullseye for D65. That's awesome. I'm super happy with that. Let's see, somebody did make a comment. Jeff said lower blue. Cool, it's exactly what I did. Good call. 313, 329, that's great. Okay, now we have the first half of the grayscale to worry about. We've got the top half sorted out. So we're not going to do 50 in the middle. We're not going to do 10 at the lowest level. Pick something in the middle. So let's go with 30. Now this time on the TV, take a look at what happened. Look at 30, 314, 324. Did I touch the dark grayscale controls? No. But when I fixed the top end, it kind of sort of naturally fixed the bottom end. Now, is it perfect? No. There's still a smidge of red. See, it's 314 instead of 313. Whoop-de-doo, it's 0.001. We are well within tolerance. I don't have to fix this if I don't want to. But blue is 324. So 329 is the target, and we're at 324. We're not quite in tolerance, but we're really, really, really close. For me to make one adjustment, it might be out of tolerance. So I'm probably going to be pretty happy with this, but let's take a full read of the grayscale first before we go to the next page. So that was pretty cool. For those of you who work on a lot of Sonys, something I noticed with Sony also is that if you fix the top end of the grayscale, it fixes the bottom end too. So that's really awesome because it's less work for the calibrators. Now check this out. All we did was adjust, and I did not know this was going to happen, guys. Remember, I'm learning this just as you are as we're going along here together. We adjusted the gain control with 80%, our sort of reference point, and look at that. We only adjusted the top end of the grayscale, and it is flat, 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 flat. Now, if we look down here, I do like to look at the numbers just to make sure there's nothing that looks, no red flags, if you will. So if we look at all the X numbers, the lowest one is 311. the highest one is 314. That's well within tolerance for all the levels for X. For Y, we want to be between 325 and 329, and we are 322, 323, 324. 325 is in tolerance, 326 is in tolerance, 327, 329 is a bullseye, 329 is a bullseye, 329 is a bullseye, and then we have a tiny smidge of green at the top end at 100. I'm happy with this, right? I've got a nice flat line. I don't have any like gross green errors anywhere throughout the grayscale. This looked pretty darn good so far. So I'm going to move on. Okay, now let's look at the same sort of test. We were looking at it at 10 point. Let's just double check everything and look at it in a 20 point increments of 5s. I'm assuming, predicting that it's still going to be nice and flat, but I've said this plenty of times. I need to make a shirt. You can't fix what you don't measure, right? So I'm always looking at the test patterns and I'm always looking at the data. Your eyes and the data should agree. That's the hope. Right, this is looking pretty decent. Is it perfect? No. Is it pretty good? It is. There's a little bit of a hump in the delta error, I'd say between like maybe like 20 and about 60. So from here until about here. So this whole chunk of the grayscale right here has a luminance issue, but it's not bad. I mean, look at it. The number one, the delta error, even on the worst level, is still under 2. So that's still, you know, within tolerance. That's great. In fact, the biggest error is a 2.1. For most people, you can't start to see any differences in color until you're at about a 3. So being a 2.1, I'm still pretty happy with. Now, could I make it better? That's the $1 million question. I don't know if I can make it better. I'll try. So let's go back to that 20-point system. In the 20-point system, we manipulated it in such a way that the luminance is correct. Because remember, we were lowering and raising the different values all at the same time. So in other words, +5 on red, +5 on green, +5 on blue, that level just got a little bit brighter. But that didn't change the mix of red, green, and blue. That just changed how bright that level was of gray. So let's see if we can now manipulate it and massage it a little bit more and see if we can get this to be even better. Now, on the luminance, I started at the bottom and worked up, but that really doesn't matter. On the grayscale, I like to start at the top and move my way down. Only because that's sort of a historical thing. I don't think it's going to break anything if you start at the bottom and work your way up, but the manufacturers have told us in the past, like from the engineers, they've told us before, start at the top and work your way down. So I just kind of do that all the time anyway. I don't want to forget. Again, I don't know if it's going to hurt anything, but we'll just stick with the way I normally do it. Okay, so let's look at 100. 100 is showing us that there's slight deficiency on red, but overall it's pretty good. Yeah, see, we're like 314. I mean, I'm not nervous about this at all. This is going to be just fine. If we look at the bottom end, we got some 330s, 329s, 329s. That all looks pretty good. Let's look at 60. That's where that hump sort of ends, if you will. So if you look at 60, this is a really nice graph to have here of all the data. So look at 60%. So on 5% all the way to 100, this is the measurement for X, this is the measurement for Y, this is the measurement for luminance, and target Y is what the luminance should be based on how bright the TV is and what gamma curve you chose. So at 5%, I measured a 0.2, I'm at a 0.2. Cool, so I got the luminance right for level 5. 10, target's 0.9, I nailed it, 0.9. 15, target's 2.3, we're at 2.2, etc., 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 etc. So luminance wise, I mean, look at all these numbers, they match. 150, 135, 120, 106, 105, 92, 92, 80, 80, 68, 68, 58, 58, 47, 48, who cares? 40, 40, 33, 33, 26, 26, 20, 20, 15, 15, 10, 10, 7, 7, 4, 4, 2, 2, and 0.9 and 0.2. I am more than happy with the luminance. These delta errors are probably because the grayscale itself is slightly off. So let's just start like at one that might be kind of obvious, and let's go with 60. It's 313,327. It is within tolerance. I want to see if I can make it any better just because I'm stubborn. So I just want to do 60 just to kind of prove a point here. So if you look over, a couple of different graphs here are really going to help us. So let's go up to 60%. Now I wouldn't normally start at 60. I'm just using 60 as an example. See, there's still -5, -5, -5. Now take a look at this RGB balance graph. The red, green, and blue are not even, but also red, green, and blue are also slightly below that 100 mark. So this tells me a couple of things. Level 60 needs a little bit of green. Whether I lower red and blue to get that or I raise green to get that, you know, that's up to you. I shy away from adjusting the green control because it can be kind of sensitive sometimes. So I'll probably mess with the red and blue a little bit, but look at how all three of them are below 100. So this RGB balance graph is telling me two things about 60%. It's too dark by a smidge, and there's not enough green by a smidge. So let's see if we can fix it. Again, we're 313,327, and we're off by 1 nit. Again, this is just being like insanely picky, but let's see what happens. So let's run the meter. It's running now, and let's take red, go up till the red bar meets 100. Cool, green. Now it met the bar at 100, but I had to go up like 8 clicks. That's kind of too much, too close to comfort for green for me. So we could also do this. I could lower blue until it's level with green, and then I can lower red until it's level with green and blue. Now that's going to give us some funky numbers, right? Red's -10, green's -5, blue's -9. So they're not equal anymore, but at least we're at the right shade of white. Now that they're equal and it's the right shade of white, now we can raise all three of them. So I'm not gonna rely on the number that's on the screen. I'm just gonna count in my head. So red, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Green, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Blue, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now we're getting closer, right? So let's go up on blue one more, up on green, 1 or 2 more, maybe 3, and then red. Let's bump that up. Now they're all pretty much at 100. So we've fixed the luminance error, and we fixed the gray, the D65 error at the same time, which was kind of cool. And if we look at 60 over here, the delta error went from 2.1 to so small I can't measure it. Yeah, I can't measure it. It's too tiny. So it's going to be less than 1 for sure. Less than 1, that's awesome. Less than 1 is where you start seeing like studio monitors and stuff. You know, anything less than 1 is super, super good. So I'm really happy with that. I'm going to leave it to you guys because this is your time. Let's take a quick, you guys put in the chat what you think would be best here. I'm fine to do it, but I don't want to eat up a bunch of your time if you don't want me to do it. Would you guys like to see me go through and fix all of this? Feel free to hop into the chat box or question box and let me know what you think. And if nobody speaks up, I'm going to move on. So speak now or forever hold your peace. Bill says, I don't think you need to do each one. I agree, Bill. But a few. Ben says, skip it. Jeff says, move on. Bill says, do a few. I agree with Bill. Let's just do a few. So we did 60. 60 is fine. That's cool. Let's look at, I don't know, 30. 30 has a delta error of 1.9, so it's just barely under that 2 mark, but it is. RGB graph, you can see it's not quite even, but it's, close. 30%. Okay, now we had cranked each one of those levels to +25. So let's take red down so it meets 100 on the bar graph. Green, 8 clicks on level 60, I was a little uncomfortable with. But if I can get away with just like 2 or 3 clicks to fix it here, I'm okay with that. That seems to be pretty darn close. And then let's lower the blue just a little bit. And now we have 30 as a delta error of 0.7. So we went from a 1.9 delta error to a 0.7, and we did it in about 20 seconds. So I think that's worth it. If you're on the job site and this person's paying you, top dollar for a really good calibration, I would sit here and spend, an extra 10 or 15 minutes really getting all of these nice and flat. But I think you guys get the point here of how this works. And again, hats off to Samsung. This is awesome. This is working really well. It's great to see this. Bill says, re-look at the luminance right after doing each level of gray. He's done that for years and forget to do that at the end. Hey man, I'm with you. So, if I ran through and did all of these levels, I'm going to do two things after that. I'm going to do a read series so I can just kind of double check that I got them all. But then I'll also look at a grayscale test pattern just to make sure what I did didn't screw up the picture. Again, it's very common and it's unfortunate that sometimes the data will look right, but the picture will look bad. So you've got to make sure you look at both. You see 30 is nice and tight right here, 60 is, 80 is, so we have a few levels here, but those are the ones that we worked on, right? 60, boom, 30, boom. So again, we could go through, but when these delta errors start getting into the, under 2, especially under 1, don't lose any sleep over it. Move on. It's not going to be a visible difference. And here's the thing, guys, too. It gets to a point where it's like, what am I more concerned with? The data, the graphs, or the picture? If I wanted a perfect looking graph, don't know if I can do it because the TV might not be able to do it. But if you're going to try, if I spend an extra, let's say it takes an hour to do this and it makes no visible difference in the picture, you just spent all that time just for peace of mind. And I get that, when I'm working on my own TV, or if I'm working with a client who has a really nice system and they're willing to pay me for as much time as it takes to really nail it, of course I'm going to go through and get all these levels right. But if this is a customer who's like, they want something better than factory, but they don't need it to be absolutely perfect, you're going to spend less time on the TV. You're going to get in and out of there quicker, but at the same time, you're going to save them some money too, right? Like you could do, I'm not going to tell you how to run your business or how to charge people. I'm just telling you from my experience. Sometimes I'll have clients who email me or call me and they, hey, I want my TV calibrated. How much is it? Okay, well, I got to ask you like 8 questions so I can answer your question, right? And, how old is the TV? How is the room lighting? What other components are in the system? Where do you like to sit? What are the things you like to watch? So we're doing sort of a client interview, right? And in that process, you're going to figure out, how much time to spend on this TV. So customers, in my experience, if you just tell them it's $500 to calibrate the TV, it might be sticker shock to them. And they're like, well, I'm not spending $500. The TV only cost me $1,000, right? And I get that. That makes total sense. But what if you said, Mr. Customer, I have a couple options for you. I can take this TV to the nth degree, spend 4 hours on it, and it's going to be $500. Or we can start with simple adjustments, spend half the time. I'll charge you $300 instead of $500, and let's just see if you're happy with that, And then, you get into it, you make all the adjustments you want to make for $250 or $300. You and the customer look at a couple test patterns. You look at a few different pieces of content, and the customer says, you know what, this is cool, I like it. So you just saved them a little bit of money. It took you less time, and you didn't like completely, shoot yourself in the foot with that kind of price tag. Because let's think about it too, guys, like it's sort of a domino effect. So, this person goes and tells his friend, yeah, I was going to get the TV calibrated, but it was $500. And now his friend is like, yeah, that's too much, I'm not going to do it either, But I had a customer who lived really close to me. A dealer put his TV in, left it in vivid mode, just didn't really take care of the customer as much as most of us would. And I said, look, let me just come over there on Saturday. I'll come over for about an hour. Let's just make some adjustments and let's just see where we're at. And I took my generator over there, no light meter. I just took my generator. It was a Samsung, so I knew the TV and the menu pretty well. Put it in a better mode. Turn off the energy savings. Set white level, black level, color, tint, and sharpness. In about 30 minutes, if it even took that long, we made some massive improvements to the TV. And he was super happy with it. So I charged them like 150 bucks, and I was there for a little bit less than an hour. So, you know, you might want to think about how you do this kind of stuff. I don't want to scare anybody away. I want them to have a good picture. They spent money on a nice TV. So if that's a 45-minute, $150 calibration, cool. If that's a 4-hour, $500 calibration, that's cool too. But don't lose the business and don't lose the money because of the price, is all I'm trying to say. I hope that makes sense. All right, we're almost done, guys. The light at the end of the tunnel. We've got the grayscale, we've got the luminance, we've got the gamma, we've got everything we want. Now let's touch up the primary and secondary colors. As I said before, you can't fix what you don't measure. So before I make any adjustments or do anything here, let's measure the color gamut. Now I have a feeling, because this happens pretty often, that if you get a really good white balance out of the display, the primary and secondary colors will land much, much, much closer than if you had a bad grayscale adjustment. So check this out. Green's still a little oversaturated, so is yellow, so is red. Magenta is much better. If you guys remember, magenta before was like way here towards blue. Cyan's bang on. Blue's a little off. We know what white is because we just fixed it. So our X and Y coordinates for the individual primary and secondaries are pretty good. The luminance errors, the graph is zoomed in too far, so let me redo that. All right. Now red's a little dark, green's a smidge dark, blue's a little dark. I wouldn't worry about cyan or yellow. Magenta's maybe a smidge dark too. But let's look at the delta errors. Now, as I say this, do not rely on the delta errors alone. And quite honestly, don't rely on just the graphs alone. When you get really close with your adjustments, start looking at the actual coordinates and the actual targets. A good analogy might be this. I don't know if any of you golf. I do. And when I'm teeing off on a par 4, I'm not aiming for the hole. I'm aiming for the fairway. And then I'm aiming for the green. And then I'm aiming for the hole. So you can use the delta errors as sort of like a guide so you know you're going in the right direction. But when it really comes down to it, the coordinates are what we're really aiming for here. So start with the delta errors. See if there's any that are out of whack. So red's a 2.3. I might want to touch that a little bit. Green's a 1.1. Probably not going to touch it. I might lower the saturation just a little bit, just to make the graph a little bit tighter. But not necessary, but I'll probably do it. Blue's a 3, so that might be worth taking a look at. Look at cyan, 0.6, not touching it. Magenta, a 1.9, probably won't touch it. Yellow, 0.9, definitely not going to touch it. So out of all of the primary and secondary colors, all 3 of them, most of them are well within spec. I'm probably going to just fiddle with a few of these. So this doesn't matter, it's just my own rhythm. I like to start with the biggest error and work my way down to the lowest error. Just get the big ones out of the way first. So the biggest delta error here is blue. Now I'm going to make another prediction. TVs typically have a really hard time with blue. And a lot of times it is, see, the good news is here is it's oversaturated. A lot of TVs, blue comes in undersaturated and you're just stuck with it. But let's see if we can make any improvements here to blue. Now, if I can't get it perfect, I'm okay with that, but I do want to make it better if I can. Okay, now I'm going to spend a couple of minutes here explaining how Samsung's color management works, because it's confusing if you don't know how it works. So if you've been to ISF class, or if you've played with this enough, or even, gosh, even if you know Photoshop and Lightroom pretty well, you know that color has 3 properties, right? If you look at the CIE chart, it has an X and a Y, so that's a 2-dimensional space, but color also has luminance, right? So color is actually 3 dimensions. We have the X and Y coordinates on this 2D graph, and then we have the luminance values on this 2D graph. So if I take X and Y and big Y, I know exactly what's going on with that color, right? So in a lot of TVs, LG, just off the top of my head, Sony, a few others, when you go into the color management menu and you pick blue, you have hue and saturation and luminance. Cool, that's everything I need. But when you look into a Samsung menu, I'm gonna pick blue and then look at the adjustments, red, green, and blue. So I have red, green, and blue adjustments for blue. It's kind of weird, right? Which one's hue, which one's saturation, which one is luminance? You don't know, right? But I think this was actually kind of genius. And the more I learned this Samsung way of doing it, the more I started to really appreciate it because it just makes sense. Don't let it confuse you. Think about what colors you have to mix to make these other colors. So when we're working on a primary color, in this case, it's blue. The blue control for blue is the luminance control. So I'm going to run the meter, watch the blue luminance bar graph right here, and then watch the blue delta error for luminance right here. Factor position's at 47, so I'm going to remember that. But if I crank it, blue's going to get brighter and brighter and brighter and brighter. Now I'm at 100 and it needs to be brighter, but I can't make it any brighter, so I'm stuck. I've hit a brick wall. But just so you can see how the control works, if I lower blue for blue, again, that's the luminance control, blue gets darker and darker, darker and darker and darker, okay? Cool. Now I'm not 100% comfortable with leaving this at 100. I do notice a lot of times when you make these like wild adjustments, it can cause some banding and some posterization in the actual content. So I don't know if I'm going to be comfortable with this yet. I'm going to need to look at a few things before I can kind of figure that out. But if we're relying on the graphs and relying on the numbers, take a look at what happened. We raised blue to 100 to get the luminance right, but the delta error is still over a 3. So it's like it gets to a point where, if you've heard this saying before, is the juice worth the squeeze, right? So the luminance error is kind of pretty much under control, but there's still a major saturation error and a small hue error. These three graphs are very helpful. In fact, all of these are helpful. So this graph is telling me that there's a luminance problem for blue. This graph is telling me there's a luminance problem for blue. The data is telling me, look at the target for blue. It's 5.6 nits. I'm sorry, it's 5.8, I'm at 5.6. So the graph looks worse than the error actually is. So let's see if we can move the dot around. Maybe we can make the saturation error and the hue error a little bit smaller. I don't know. Let's try it. Okay, so going back to the Samsung menu, blue is the luminance control for blue. Now take a wild guess. If I add green to blue, I'll let you guys answer in the chat box here. If I add green to blue, where's the blue dot going to go? And I'm going to be stubborn and I'm not moving on until someone says something. I'm going to make you force you to participate. Anybody? Anybody? Towards green. Thank you, Bill. Makes sense, right? Add green to blue. The blue dot's going to go towards green. Let's see how much. If I go all the way to 100, I went way past the target. This tells me that the control works. That's a good thing. So I'm going to lower this again, and I'm going to keep my eye on all three of those delta graphs, delta L, delta C, delta H. So by manipulating the green control for blue, I've got a much lower error. Now, the X and Y, pretty good. Delta C is not even there, it's gone. Delta H is barely there. Delta L is barely there. Let me lower the blue luminance just a little bit, because again, it was at 100. I'm not totally comfortable with that. If we can get the blue luminance down, but not screw up everything else, that's a win. All right, look at that. Cool. So I have basically no delta error on luminance, pretty much no delta error on chrominance, aka saturation, or hue. The overall delta error now for blue is a 1.2. It was a 3.3, I think, or 3.1, and now we're below tolerance, right? So this is good. We're within tolerance. I'm happy with blue at this point. This is okay. Now let's move on to the next color. The biggest error was red at a 2.3. Now the story is the same, guys. Now the red control for red is the luminance control. The green control for green is the green luminance control. Okay, so if there's a red luminance issue, let's make red brighter. You can see the gamut luminance graph. You can see it moving up and up and up and up and up. Now again, we're getting really high in the values here, but I don't know if that's what we're going to stick with. We haven't tried any other controls yet. So we've got the red luminance under control, but it's still oversaturated. So I want you guys to, I don't know if you can see this. I hope you can, but I think you'll get the point either way. If I take a ruler and I draw a straight line from red to green, it's a beeline, right? It's a nice straight line. So the next thing I'm going to try is I'm going to add green to red and see if it moves in a straight line. And then if I'm really lucky, it'll hit the dead center of the box. I don't know. Let's try. So let's add some green to red. And it's moving. That's good. The control does something. It's moving more. It's moving more. Moving more. And it's like I've done this before. Okay, now red, that threw off the luminance a little bit. So let's go back to the red control for red. Lower that luminance. And boom, we're there. Now the delta error for red is a 0.8. Awesome, huge win. We messed with blue a little bit. Green looks pretty good. It's within tolerance, but it's oversaturated. Let's just see if it's something we can fix. If it only takes a few seconds to fix it, then I'm gonna fix it. I'm not gonna sit here for 20 minutes, but if it only takes a few seconds, why not? Okay, so what's wrong with green? It's oversaturated, right? But let's let the meter catch up. It's oversaturated, but the hue is okay and the luminance is okay. Good, right? There's no luminance error and there's no hue error, but there is a saturation error. We see it here and we see it here. And if you have the coordinates memorized, you'd see it there too. So the green control for green is luminance, but I don't need to touch that because it's fine. But if I take the red control and add red to green, green's gonna go down here towards red. Then when it gets to about the upper right corner of this box, then I can add some blue, and then the green dot should go down towards blue, and if I'm really lucky, the green dot will be dead center. So by adding red and adding blue at the same time, I'm gonna bring green down. Hope that makes sense, but let's see it in real life. Okay, so we're gonna go the green control, oh, it was already there. Let's add 5 clicks of red, maybe more. Maybe more. Ooh, control's moving, but you really gotta punish it. Okay, let's go to blue now. Let's add some blue, and it should make a beeline towards blue, and boom, there it is, right? Basically dead center of the box. No luminance error, basically no chrominance, and basically no hue error either. So again, guys, it took me 15 seconds. If that's all it takes, I'm gonna do it. And last but not least, that magenta being too dark, hey man, if all the other colors are right, let's just fix magenta too. Now, what's wrong with magenta? The hue and the saturation are okay, and the luminance is okay. The luminance is okay because we fixed red and blue. Remember, magenta is a byproduct of red and blue added together. So this is really cool. This actually worked the way it was supposed to. If you get red, green, and blue correct, cyan, magenta, yellow should be right where they're supposed to be anyway. But if they're not, you have the controls to fix it. So that was cool. We fixed red and green. I'm sorry, we fixed red and blue, and that fixed magenta. Boom, that's awesome. Okay, now we made a lot of adjustments in the color gamut. Let's look at something and make sure it doesn't look weird. Let's go, I'll look at the SMPTE bars just because I'm pretty used to those by this point. It's only been about 15 years. And the SMPTE bars look normal, and let's look at some skin tones. Oh, that's right, that's the 7G. So the skin tone test I have to pick manually. Now, while I'm doing this, guys, I want to throw this out at you. Portrait Displays is very, very, very open to feedback. So if you guys are CalMan users and you've noticed some bugs, or maybe there's some features that you wish were there, or just little things. Like for example, this is a user interface thing, right? Like actually here it's not too bad because you can see white, green, blue, cyan, magenta, yellow. But like if you look back couple pages, see, I have to slide this over. It's kind of annoying. It's not, bad. It's not gonna like make or break what I'm doing here. But if you guys have anything in CalMan that you have maybe on like a wish list, email those to me, because we work with those guys quite a bit. And if we're not giving them feedback, then they don't know what to fix. So If you guys have any issues with Caliman or again, any bugs or anything like that, please let me know because I can pass that information on. Now, Jacob just brought up a really good point. He says for SDR, sometimes I only adjust at 75% saturation. And Jacob, I 1,000,000% agree with that. We're gonna see that actually on the next page. So let's go there. By the way, the skin tones look just fine. They look really great, actually. Now, here's how we're gonna know. The next page, we're gonna look at the saturation sweeps. So on the CMS page, our targets are 100% saturation of each color, right? But what we don't know is the middle portions. Now, I'll use another audio analogy. What's more important when we talk about music? The highest frequencies, the lowest frequencies, or the frequencies in the middle? I'll let you guys answer in the chat. What's more important, the middle or the extremes? Good. Jeff says speaking frequencies, which is about in the middle, right? Think of your instruments, you know, guitars and strings, and you know, we don't really listen to things at 20 hertz and 20,000 hertz. The middle is more important, and color is really no different. But again, we're looking at 100%. We know nothing about the midtones of green or red or blue, but we're going to find that out on this page. Now, Jacob, what you're probably doing, tell me if I'm wrong here, is you're probably jumping straight to this page and jumping straight into the, you know, the 80%. Okay, this proves Jacob's point. Notice how with red, at least, I'm gonna let it finish out here, but 100% saturated red, nailed it. It's perfect, right? But look at 80%. That's way off. 60%, way off. 40% gets closer, 20% is pretty good. And then no red is white, right? And that's bang on. So what I would do here is I would, instead of using 100% as my reference, I'll use 80% instead. If I fix 80% red, it might fix all of these too. But again, the midtones are more important. So think of how many things you might see on a TV that's 100% red. Maybe a Ferrari, maybe a Coke can, and there might be a sports team or two out there that have fully saturated red. But the middle is more important. So in Calman, here's what you have to do. Go down to the bottom left, hit that drop up screen, click red, and then down here you can click on 80. And now when we take readings and make adjustments, it's gonna be this little dot right here that we're trying to manipulate. So let's take a quick look at the other colors. Green tracks pretty well, yellow tracks really well, cyan's pretty good. Blue is a little undersaturated in the middle. Magenta is actually pretty good, but look at 80. It's kind of weird, right? Saturated, saturated, undersaturated, saturated. It's kind of strange. I don't know if I can fix just 80 without screwing up everything else, but red's really a concern here. So instead of adjusting red at 100%, let's just go ahead and do it at 80. So we have 80 down here. The meter is running. And let's fix it there. Red. Okay, so what's wrong with it? Red is, let the meter catch up. It's undersaturated for sure. The hue is off. It's more of an orangish red instead of a red, and the luminance is a little bit off too, so it's a little bright. So let's see if we can fix it. So if the luminance is off, let's fix that first. Now, guys, why? This is a good pop quiz question for you guys. Why am I more concerned about the luminance on red than I am about the saturation and the hue? Oh, look at that 80% dot, much better, right? This is one of those things, guys, like taking an extra few seconds to fix these things, it's just worth it. Just do it. You're already here. Okay, the reason I'm more concerned about luminance for the primary colors is because that's more important than the hue and the saturation. Ben says luminance is most noticeable in primary colors. Yes, you're 100% right. If the red measurement is right in the middle of the dot, I'm sorry, if the dot's right in the middle of the square, but red's way too dark, you will have skin tone errors and it will look really bizarre. I had a guy call me one time and he sent me a picture. He's like, hey, I think something's wrong. And it was he sent me a screenshot, or a picture rather, of one of the Star Wars movies. I don't know those movies very well, so don't kill me, but it was one of the characters and his face was like really, really red. I'm like, what is going on with that? And then I had him reset the picture mode and it was fine again. And what had happened was he had taken some settings that he found online and he plugged those settings into his projector. And for those of you who've done this a while, that's not what you're supposed to do. You can make things worse. And in this case, he did. So he sends me these pictures and I'm like, reset the picture mode. He resets the picture mode, everything's fine after that. So that told me that the color management controls seemed like they work, but they really didn't work. Okay, so let's reread. Let's maybe, I don't know. Let's see if we can get blue just like a little bit better. So we're gonna look at 80% blue. I'm gonna try to line that up just a smidge better. I'm already in here. Okay, so blue needs a little less luminance. And it barely moved. The blue luminance control doesn't really work till you get to about like 15. So while I'm at 0, I'm gonna press and hold the button, watch the delta L graph. Doesn't move, doesn't move, doesn't move, all of a sudden starts moving. So I really can't trust that control anywhere from 0 to 15. So I'm gonna leave it at 15. Okay, now what else is wrong with blue? It's undersaturated, right? So if I take away red, blue should run away from red, and that's what it's doing. Now if I take away green, blue should run away from green, which is what it's doing. Let's maybe add a little bit more red, so the dot moves over towards red, and maybe let's take out a little bit more green, and there we go. Bang on, right? So you guys see how easy this is once you understand the Samsung menu. Again, if these things only take a few seconds to fix it, fix it. But I wouldn't sit here and fiddle with it for 20 minutes unless that's what I'm being paid for. All right, let's take a read of the full color gamut now that we fixed a few other things. Ooh, look at red, beautiful. Beautiful, much, much, much better. Now red's oversaturated at 100%. I'm okay living with that because number one, someone in a studio would have a different point of view on this and 100% agree with them. But if you're dealing with like a regular person, nobody's gonna complain if red's oversaturated a little bit. But if it's undersaturated, everybody's gonna complain. So I'd rather it be a little over than under. So in order to fix the midtones of red, I had to oversaturate it at 100%. That was a trade-off that I'm willing to live with. But look how much tighter blue is. Same thing with blue. 20, 40, 60, 80, but then look at 100. It's out a little bit. But it's the same story with red. How much stuff do you see on the screen that's fully saturated blue? I mean, the sky isn't always fully saturated blue. You know, sometimes it's a lighter blue. I really can't think of anything off the top of my head that's fully saturated blue. Maybe a couple sports teams jerseys, maybe, but you know, not a lot. But the midtones of blue are correct now, and that to me was worth making those changes. Okay, Jacob asks another question. Actually, Ben and Jacob. Ben says, do you ever find that Calman AutoCal will do whatever it has in order to make the numbers and leave the settings in higher values than we would typically if we were doing it manually? Yes. Ben, there's plenty of times where I'll run the AutoCal and I'm still not happy with it and I have to touch it up manually afterwards. But the time it took to get closer was way faster than if I had done that myself. So I'll usually let the if I'm going to use AutoCal, I'll let it run and then I'll maybe fine tune it after that. But yes, I see that all the time. The second question sort of ties into this, and Jacob asked this question. Does the 3D LUT and Illumigen fix the problem with the CMS? Jacob, yes, 100% it will. So when you get into these high-end video processors, they can fix these little inaccuracies no problem if you build a lookup table with one of those processors. You're 100% correct. All right, cool. If you guys have more questions on top of that, feel free. Okay, now we're down to the rechecks. Let's take a quick reading here to see if we have any clipping going on a graph at least. We're still at 150 nits. That's fine. We wanted to be right around there. Look at what happened here. I'm looking at clipping with peak white, so it's going to go all the way up to 109%. So it's tracking well, tracking well, tracking well. It's a little squirrely up here, but look at red. But look at where red clips. It's right at 100. So this is really not, this is not a big concern for me. If we look at it in the legal range, run it one more time. If we look at it in the legal range, it's fine. So all this is telling me, if I look at it with peak white clipping, is if there is a shade of white that's outside of the legal range, it might be a little bit pink. But if the content was done correctly, there won't be any levels outside of 235. Hope that makes sense. But this looks bad on the graph. It's not bad in real life. But if we look at the legal range, again, it's totally fine. Now, if you guys remember, we started with about 150 nits and we dropped at some point down to about 140 and we came back up to 150. So the lesson to be learned here is what you start with is not always what you're going to end with because of all the things you changed in between the start and the finish. So this is why I really like this workflow, especially if you're new to this, is it kind of like keeps you in check, right? It has you check things multiple times at the beginning and at the end. So I'm very happy with this. Let's take a look at the contrast pattern with our eyeballs. Let's make sure the data matches our eyes. And oh wow, I wish you guys could see this in real life. This looks awesome. It's neutral white. I can see all the way up to box 254, which is the very last one you can see if you're in full range. So this is cool. Not seeing any discoloration. Maybe at like 251 or 252, there might be like a teeny tiny bit of pink. Let's see if my eyes are lying to me or not. If I lower the contrast like, oh gosh, sure did, guys. I went from 39 to 38 and that tiny bit of pink at 251, 252, 253 went away. One click down on contrast, fixed that red problem. I'm sorry, I should say fix the pink problem in the grayscale. Now, just for giggles, while we're here, let's see what happened. Let's see what happened at that 109. Oops. Let's see if that pink flattening out went away. No, it didn't. So, but it looks better to my eyes, and looking better to my eyes is way more important than the graph. So I did come down one click and got rid of, I mean, guys, it was a hint of pink that most people probably wouldn't see. But if I can come down one click and fix it, not a big deal. Okay, let's take a second look at the black level. And I can barely see 17 in the upper left if I'm dead center. And the 17 in the middle, I bet if I put a blanket over this one window I have in here, I bet it would be a little bit easier to see, but let's just go to that shadow detail control. If I come up one, maybe two, ooh, three, yeah, that's too much. So here's the problem, is I'm raising the black level like one click at a time to see if I can maybe just make that 17 just slightly more visible. But if I come up one click, doesn't really help. If I come up a second click, again, I don't know if this is going to translate well on the camera. If I come up a third click, I can see 17 a little bit better, but it made the background of the test pattern gray. So I just ruined my contrast ratio. So I'm going to leave it at 0. Again, I can barely see it, which is correct. And again, if I close the window or put a blanket over the window here, I'm sure I'd see it very easily. But the fact that I can see it just barely, considering there's some light in this room, that's a win. That's cool. Okay, let's keep moving through and checking things. We're already at 150 nits, we know that, but not a bad idea to check. 149.5. Awesome. Okay, now in this point in CalMan, you can either go back and keep working if you're not happy. You know, maybe you want to go through and fine tune a little bit more. I'm very happy with the way this TV turned out, so I'm going to jump straight to post calibration. If I wanted to go back and start the workflow over and run through it one more time, I would just click back to display settings. But I'm happy, so we're going to go post calibration. Now everything from here on is what's going to end up on your report at the end. So we're going to do a read and saturation sweeps one more time. Man, that red looks really good. It's not perfect, but it's damn good. And it's way better than it was before. You know, sometimes I even have to say this to myself too. I have to say, you know, nothing's perfect, right? I don't care how much the TV or the projector costs. Nothing is perfect. We're here to make it better, right? So I try to have to keep, I kind of have to keep myself in check sometimes of, you know, just being okay with it being good enough. So try not to let it drive you too crazy. I'm pretty guilty of that sometimes. This looks really great, guys. Saturation sweeps, magenta, blue. Yeah, this looks awesome. Okay, we can move on. Okay, the color checker. This is the torture test. There's about, I can't remember exactly how many, like 60 readings or something here. If you really want to like really torture test the TV, go to your CalMan settings, under workflow basic adjustments, come all the way down here. And if you pick color checker SG and color checker video, this is the torture test. Now look at how many points it's going to read. I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to bore you guys to death. But this is more for like a, you know, if this was a studio monitor, yes, I'd want to read this many points. If I'm a manufacturer trying to make sure my TV calibrates well, yes, I'm going to read this many points. But just to save some time here. Let's just stick with the default, which still gives you a lot of data. We know white's okay, cool. I like to look down here just because I like to watch it in real time. It ran through a few different levels of gray. Now it's running through these different colors. Now these are colors that are found in nature. They're Pantone colors too. So like when you look at some of these are all skin tones, and you see these little codes down here. If you were to look at like a Pantone, like a chip chart, these are mostly skin tones. So you look like 7J, for example, it's that particular skin tone. And those are all sort of crowded around right here. There's more of it, there's a big emphasis here on skin tones, because if skin tones are wrong, we're all going to notice that, right? If you're watching the news and the newscaster looks like pink or green, you'll see it, right? So when you're doing this test, there's just a little more emphasis here on the skin tones. But look at this, this is awesome. Blue shot up to almost a delta arrow of 4, but we knew that, right? Because look, another cool little trick is if you hover your pointer over the dot, it'll tell you what it is. So if I'm like, what is this magenta right here? Okay, it's 0.28, 0.425. So I can plot it on a graph if I want to. People ask about this all the time. That's just black. You can ignore it. But blue is the biggest error here, and we knew that, and we're okay with that. Red had an error too, but we knew that also. But look at every other color in this test. It's below 2. In fact, some of these are like 0.6, 1.1, some of these bigger ones, 1.9. This is awesome, guys. Hats off to Samsung on this one. Okay, I'm not going to bore you to death with this, but you guys will get the point. We calibrated the TV. Here's all the settings we came up with. We were movie mode, warm 1. The gamma was 2.2. I can't remember what the backlight was. Brightness, contrast, color, sharpness. Now, as you're filling this out, there's not, you obviously don't have any like empty fields here to put like the 20-point white balance controls in, the values in, I should say. So I'll go down to the notes here and I'll put anything that's not up here, I'll put down here in the notes. The last thing I want to do is calibrate this TV, and a month later the customer calls and says, hey, I don't know what happened, but my TV looks like crap again. And I say, okay, well, you know, what happened? Oh, I think my son reset it. Okay, well, I didn't write your settings down, so I have to come back and redo it all. Or, hey, I wrote your settings down. Let's do a quick FaceTime and I'll just walk you through putting the settings back in. You know, it's going to take a few minutes, but it's much better than driving out there. And you know, I do a lot of jobs like in South Florida, for example. That's about a 3.5 or 4 hour drive for me. So I try to, you know, I try to give the customer as much data as I can. So I don't want to drive back down there. Jacob, actually, Ben had a couple questions, and okay, cool. So Ben says, I have some questions generally about the industry right now. While we wait for the color checker to run for OLED panels, you're circling D65 or alternative white point due to metaverse. Okay, Ben, good question. He's talking about alternate white points. You hear this conversation a lot about like the JUD mod. Not necessary unless you're putting two different TVs of different technologies next to each other. So in other words, if you're doing like a RGB OLED and it's right next to a WRGB OLED, you're probably going to have to use an alternate white point for one of them. If you're looking at an LCD versus a WRGB OLED, you're probably going to have to use an alternate white point so they actually match. But if you're doing just one TV and that's the only TV in the room, you should not have to do that. Question 2, I have an i1 Pro 3 and a C6, good little combo. I've been requests for the higher end Sony projectors. I feel like I have to turn them down. Should I be waiting until I get a better spectro? 4 nanometers or 2 nanometers. So what Ben's talking about is the spectral response of a display. They're all different. And if you guys can imagine, you know, lasers have a very, very, very narrow bandwidth. And the meter that Ben has, the i1 Pro 3, can't resolve down to 4 nanometers, which is typically what a laser is. The i1 Pro 3 is typically, not typically, the i1 Pro 3 is a 10 nanometer device. So if you're trying to read 2 nanometers or 3 nanometers or 4 nanometers, and your meter can only resolve to 10, then are you taking measurements and getting the right values? Maybe. But here's the good news. It's really, really close, guys. We're talking a difference of a few nanometers in some cases. So this is not worth turning down the job. You're still going to get a good calibration, because think about it. Does your meter really, does it really matter what meter you have to set white level and black level and the really important things? No. But when you're doing like a 20-point white balance, or if you're doing like an advanced color management, then yeah, the i1 Pro 2, the i1 Pro 3 is going to get you pretty darn close. But here's what you have to think about then for you. Are you getting enough requests for those projectors to justify a $9,000 meter? Think of it like that. Are you doing any studio work, or are you mainly dealing with consumers? If I get called from a studio and they have a JVC or a Sony or a Barco or a Christie and it's laser driven, and I only have an i1 Pro 2 or i1 Pro 3, yes, I would turn that job down if I didn't have the right meter. But for the average person in a home theater system or a TV in their house or whatever, I'm not going to turn down any jobs because I quote unquote don't have the right meter. But if I'm doing super critical work, I might consider referring somebody else, or maybe saving up and buying the meter. Now, I don't know, man. It's kind of a weird thing, because the reason I bought my expensive meter is because I was getting a ton of requests for Sony and JVC projectors about 4 or 5 years ago. It was when the laser stuff was really new. So everybody was like hyped up about it. Everyone was running out and buying them. And I just kept getting call after call after, hey, I got one of those new laser projectors. So I got enough to where I was finally like, you know what, I'm just going to bite the bullet here and retire my, at the time I had an i1 Pro 2, and I retired that, and I got the more expensive meter. But just think about it, like, how critical is it? How much are you charging this person? And is close enough good enough, I guess, is a good way to think about it. Jacob asks, would you use gamma 2.4 as the target for SDR? Jacob, yes, I would, if I were in a studio environment or a dark room. Because this room does have some light in it, that's why I decided to do a 2.2. And to that point, I want to bring this up also. Actually, let's go to the next page so we can take some readings while we talk. We all like him and haw about what gamma to use, and because it is based on a lot of different things. But here's what I will tell you. If the room has a little bit of light in it, I'm going with 2.2. But if the room is dark and the customer's sitting really far away, I'll still use a 2.2, because here's why. If I'm at 2.4 or 1886 and I'm sitting in the right spot, I should be able to see my shadow details no problem. But if I back up 10 feet, now I can't see my shadows anymore, even though the room is pitch black. You know, light dies with distance. Take a flashlight, shine it on the wall, and back up. So I'll still go with a 2.2 if the room is dark, if the customer is sitting far away, because I want them to see their shadows. If they're sitting closer where they, you know, should be sitting, then yes, I'll stick with it, 2.4, aka 1886. Ben says my request was a $60,000 Sony projector and a Lumigen. Ben, in a job like that, it's a very high-end job. I don't know if I would turn it down, but I might just do some of the more impactful adjustments. I might say that. But to get that projector perfect with that really nice processor you're talking about, on that kind of system, I probably would be more inclined to use one of the nicer light leaders. But you know, if you're doing a $5,000 Epson, you know, then you might be comfortable with close enough, you know. But you know, we see a lot of times. I've got a friend of mine who works in a post-production facility in Toronto, and they've got like 4 JVC projectors, and because they're doing super critical work in a post-production facility, they bought the expensive meter. So just think about, like, you know, is it going to be worth it? I guess is a good way to say it. So anyway, okay, so post-calibration view. We got some really good numbers here. Now, guys, remember we did go through and we fixed the grayscale at a couple points, but we didn't do all of them. So we still have this little bit of a hump right here. But look at like 45% where there's a hump. Well, 50% there's a hump. It's still a 1.8 delta error. Again, look at the graph, 104 to 96. It's really tight anyway. In fact, if you zoom out a little bit further, now we're 120 to 80, and look, it's a dead flat line, right? So if the graph looks bad, make sure it's scaled to where it makes sense. The luminance is perfect. Color gamut, red, green, blue, cyan, magenta, yellow look good. I do have a couple of luminance errors down here on blue, red, and magenta. This is something I might want to go back and fiddle with if the error is big enough. So if we look at blue, the error is a 3.8. And what I think happened was we fixed the blue luminance, and we went back and played with the hue and the saturation for blue a little bit, but I don't know if we went back and checked the luminance again. That was, if that happened, that's my fault. But it's only a 3.8. It's not horrible. But you know, if this were a paying customer, I'd probably go back and touch those 3 levels up a little bit. Other than that, guys, we are in excellent shape here. Jeff just brought up a good point. Are those your 100% readings? Yes, they are. That reading that you're getting down here is the reading for that. So let's go back a page. This is actually a cool little exercise. Let's go back to the, actually, I think you can do it up here. You might be able to change the targets. No, you can't there. We have to go back to that page, no big deal. Color gamut. And then saturation sweeps. So if we look at blue at 100%, let's just take one read. And then let's take a read at 80. So the read at 100 is delta error of 3.9. The read at 80 is a 1.3. So Jeff, your instincts were very good. This is only like this because it's 100%. If we read 80% instead, it would be more in line. And again, the middle range of color is way more important than the extremes. So I'm willing to live with this because the rest of blue was okay. So good eye, Jeff. Good catch on that. Guys, that's it. We've been going now for about 3 hours. So it's a lot, and I really appreciate the time you guys have hung out with me today and all the participation in the comments. This is really fun stuff for me. So if I can kind of share, this with anybody who gets into it as much as I can, it really makes my day. If you guys want to, I'm just going to throw this out there. If we want to make it a perfect even 3 hours, we've got about 10 minutes to do that. I'll leave it to you guys. Do you want to take a couple of readings in HDR and see what this frame's capable of? I'll give you a few seconds to chat, put it in the chat box. Jeff says yes. Anybody else? Littering in. Okay, Jacob says yes, let's do it. Cool. I want to do it too. Everybody says yes. Okay, awesome, guys. Same wavelength here. Okay, so let's go to a different workflow. And I'm just going to do the HDR analysis. since we're not going to really be doing any. And again, guys, this is a TV in my office, so I'm not going to save all this reports and stuff. If this were a customer, then yes, I would generate the report and email it to them, of course. Let's let this workflow load up, and then we'll change some settings on the generator. So it's outputting HDR. And let's just take some measurements. I'm just curious. I don't want to get too deep into the controls because usually the controls in HDR don't help at all. If they do, it's like very minor and very touchy, but the HDR is, when we have the discussion about lookup tables, I'm all for that with HDR because that's usually a pretty easy fix. If the TV can do more than P3 and you're calibrating to P3 and you run a LUT, it's going to be okay, unless something really weird is going on. But if I can't do a LUT and I'm relying on manual adjustments for HDR, I'm probably going to get myself into trouble. Ben says, I'd be curious to hear how far down the HDR calibration rabbit hole you go. Many of my customers want to see lots of HDR Dolby Vision work done. It's always a fun conversation to explain how touchy it can be. Yeah, I agree, man. And if you guys remember back to, like, my first HDR TV that I lived with was an LG 55C7. So we're going back now to 2017. And the LG OLEDs are absolutely, and to this day, and I'm not mad at them for this, but to this day, if you try to do any manual adjustments in HDR on those LG OLEDs, you will destroy the picture. But if you build a lookup table and do it that way, now you're talking. Now you're in good shape. So this is why a lot of people with those older TVs that you can't do a lookup table with, or a projector, I can't think of any projectors you can do a lookup table with, but they will get something like a Lumigen or a MadVR or even Murideo. Like Murideo, we made a LUT box several years ago. It was only for SDR 1080p, but we don't make it anymore. But you know, you have Aja and Blackmagic, and a lot of my friends in the studio use a lot of these LUT boxes, and they can make some really good improvements for TVs that have some deficiencies here and there. But general rule of thumb for me is, if I'm going to try to fix HDR manually, I'm going to be very careful with which controls I play with, and I'm going to be very careful with how much I make the adjustments. Ooh, is Calman stuck? I think it's stuck. I may have made it angry. I'm not going to get too mad at Calman because I have a camera running, a microphone, headphones, a light meter, a generator, and a USB hub all going to this computer. So I'm not going to get mad at Calman for being upset with me this time. So let's just do a quick reboot of Calman. And pardon my messy desktop, I haven't cleaned it up in a little while. Ben says the LG long throw laser, you can do a LUT on it. Yes, you can. That is true. With TVs that can hit 100, with TVs that can hit 1,000 plus nits, do you find you can do more in HDR? No, honestly, Ben, I don't. What would be really fun to see is if you guys saw Caleb's review from Digital Trends on the 85-inch Hisense, their flagship model. I don't know if you guys saw that review. He just posted it the other day. That TV hit like 4,000 nits, like 4,100 nits or something crazy like that. Absolutely bonkers. But even on that TV, the manual controls for HDR, just it's too much. Okay, so I do want to use my profile that I made before. So let's go to Samsung Frame. I'm still using the Klein. I'm still using the Murideo. Okay, now the Murideo, I do want to change it to output HDR. So let's turn HDR on, make sure that's 10-bit. 2020 is checked, and I'm just going to stick with 4K 30 because who cares? Okay, now let's do the HDR analysis. Now, what I will do, Ben, and what a lot of people will probably agree with me who do these things a lot, that doesn't mean you can't do anything to HDR. LGs, for example, this is a really good example. On an LG, if you calibrate ISF dark mode in SDR and you go over to HDR, ISF dark mode is not there. You have to calibrate HDR and SDR and Dolby Vision on an LG separately. So it's 3 different calibrations. Gosh, I just had a brain fart. I don't remember what I was going to say. I'm really sorry about that. I hate that. Ladislav says TCL TV will have support for 1D and 3D LUT. I've heard that as well. I'm really excited to see that. That'll be cool. Oh, I remember what I was going to say with HDR. There's nothing you can do with it. In the LG's case, I remember where I was going with this. In LG, if you calibrate, let's say you calibrate filmmaker mode, and then you go to HDR and put that in filmmaker mode, that's a separate calibration. You can't think, you shouldn't think that filmmaker mode in SDR calibrated is also calibrated in HDR. It's just not how LG works. But what you'll notice is if you calibrate SDR in like ISF dark, and then you go to HDR, the HDR default picture mode is still the energy savings mode. So for HDR, you can at least put it in a better mode. You can still turn off the energy savings, and you can still do 4 or 5 major things that are going to make a huge difference. So I think that's cool. Ben says Sony uses SDR white balance and extrapolates to HDR Dolby Vision. Ben, you're exactly right. That's the idea. I've had some successes with that, and I've had some struggles with that too. Most of the time for me it works, but sometimes it doesn't, and I have to do a separate calibration for HDR. But they're getting better, that's for sure. And quite honestly, Ben, I wish everybody did that. Joel came up with a really good analogy, and I 100% agree with him here. If you have an AVR, you don't calibrate it for Atmos and then calibrate it for DTS and then calibrate it for Dolby Digital. You just do one, and the AVR takes care of everything else. And on a TV, yes, cool, calibrate SDR, everything else is calibrated. That would be ideal, but we're not there yet. Okay, the HDR analysis, I love this workflow. I can pick what I want to be on the report. So we'll look at grayscale. Peak versus window size is more of a reviewer thing, but let's just do it, why not? Color checker, sure. Let's do sweeps at P3 in 2020, and let's see how much of P3 in 2020 this thing covers. Okay, so Rec 2020, D65, we're gonna use the PQ, and we're gonna use ICTCP 240 as the delta formula. There was a really cool article, if you guys have me on LinkedIn, there's a cool article I just posted the other day about how the HDR community is going towards not using Delta E2000. It's not quite accurate enough for lower, darker levels in HDR. Okay, so the Samsung right now that it's getting HDR, is in movie mode. Let's just go through and make sure there's nothing weird with it. Brightness and contrast are pegged. That's normal. For HDR, we want as much light as we can get. Cool. Picture clarity, let's turn that off. And contrast enhancers off. We're in warm 2. We have ST84 for the gamma. We do have a slider. The slider for gamma might be, for EOTF I should say, might be something that you actually play with in here, but let's see what it does. Color space is set to auto. That's fine because we're not going to make any adjustments in there. So we're in basically a factory movie mode on the Samsung. So let's see. Now what I want here is yellow lines to target. Actually, here's what we should do first. Let's find out if we can get more light and better measurements if we change the window size. And here's how I'm going to find this out. Peak versus window size. When I run this test, at what level is the TV its brightest? Okay, doesn't matter. The TV's from a 2% window to full fields, the TV is the same amount of luminance. So that's fine. Okay. Let's see how it goes. So almost 400 nits for a frame TV, right? This is not like a, this is not like a video file, TV you'd see in a studio. So they're not going to push it crazy hard, but still 400 nits, it's not terrible. Some HDR will look pretty good. See, what we don't know, HDR is always funny, right? Because you have 1,000, just as an example, you might have 1,000 nit content on a 390 nit TV. So what does the TV do with 391 nits up to 1,000 nits, and the TV manufacturers can do whatever they want. They can either darken the entire picture so you can see it all, or they'll keep it as bright as it can get, but the highlights and we call them specular highlights, the really bright details like in a cloud would just be blown out. And the manufacturers can do whatever they want. There's no standard on how to do your tone mapping, so they'll kind of do whatever they want. And look at what they're doing here. Wow, this is kind of weird. I got excited because it was tracking really well, and right around 30%, it went like this. Now this little roll off right here is actually quite good. I like that, but I don't like this up here. And I don't know what's causing that. So maybe let's just experiment with it here a little bit. Now, how this is supposed to work is if I change this ST2084 slider, it should not reshape the line, it should just move the line. So let's crank it up to +3. And now I'm willing to bet the gray line is going to be way outside of the yellow line. Yep, you can already tell. Look at that first reading. Yep. Now let's see if it still has that weird bubble up past 60%. Or is it a nice straight line? It's a pretty straight line, and now it's going to roll off. Okay, let's go down the other way. Now this might cost us some light, but it might track better. We were what, 390 nits? Let's see. Now we're still about there. So this isn't taking away any light. This is just going to maybe move the line. And that's just the way Samsung decided to do it. You know, if that's how they did it, then that's how they did it. The only way you could fix it is a lookup table with a little fancy magic box. Oh, stay straight, stay straight. Ah, it's still gonna have that same little hump. It's better though. It's a lot better than it was. And that's actually probably lippable. Let's see, it's level like 50. 138 nits, and it's supposed to be 94. Yeah, see, it's supposed to be 94. It measured 138, so it's quite a bit too bright up there, but you know, not the end of the world. Now, could I mess with the contrast? Maybe. Let's bring the contrast down like to 45 instead of 50. Now, maybe this line will straighten out. I don't know. We're going to find out together. Maybe it's better. I don't know. Are there any more questions while we're here? Ben says he's on Sony's. He's experimented with using color 1 for SDR, HDR, color 2 for, yep. So Ben, this is exactly what I've had to do before, is like I have to do SDR in like custom Pro 1 with expert 1 for the grayscale. And then for HDR, I have to do custom Pro 2 with expert 2 for the grayscale. So I think we're doing probably the same thing. That's cool. Yeah, see, adjusting the contrast didn't really help. It helped the top end, but it screwed up the bottom end. So the only other thing I can think of to do is to maybe raise the shadow detail a little bit to take care of that bottom end. At this point, I'm just, you know, shooting in the dark here. I don't know what's going to happen. This is just a prediction, just a hypothesis. So if I lower the contrast to take care of the bump at the top, and I raise the shadow detail to take care of the dip at the bottom, maybe they'll cancel each other out. You see, Ben, this is why, quote unquote, calibrating HDR can get really weird really fast. Stay straight, stay straight. Stay there, stay there. It's better. It rolls off a little too early. Oh no, well, it does something really weird up there, but that's not horrible. Now, here's my next question. Did that cost us any light? And nope, we're still at 390 nits. So I might live with that. I might fiddle with it just like a tad bit more, but I'm pretty happy with that, considering it's a Samsung frame TV and You know, if this were like a high-end or even a mid-level TV these days, I might be a little disappointed with that. But this is why I wanted to calibrate the frame, guys, because it's usually not used for this type of stuff. And I had a feeling that it would do pretty well. I just didn't know how well, and the SDR turned out fantastic. See what the color checker looks like. Yeah, see the white's a little, it's warm too, right? So the white balance, like in warm 1's a little too warm. I'm sorry, like in movie mode, in SDR, warm 2 is a little too warm. We might change that to warm 1 and get a little more blue out of it. But I mean, here's the point, guys. Like, if the manual controls in HDR don't work, how can you fix this? You can't. You're just stuck with it. One of the other tests I like to do, I know this TV can't do anywhere near 2020, so I'm not even going to waste everyone's time. I don't know if it can do P3 either. Let's see. Oh, before we do that, let's make sure the TV is in P3 mode, because that was an option in the, I think it was an option in the color space. Auto, custom, P3. Yep, okay, so it's actually using P3. Let's see how good it is actually doing it. Oof. See, this is kind of what I was saying before, guys. Like, the errors are big enough to where you would have to make wild adjustments to fix it, and you might get it to look a little bit better on a graph, but then you go to look at skin tones or some content, and it's just trashed. Well, that's why HDR is a little weird, which is why, you know, at this point at least, I'm a huge fan of doing a lookup table, but it's expensive. You know, some of those little lookup table boxes and some of those Lumigen and MadVR type processors are very expensive. So P3, not so great, but I wasn't expecting much more. How much of 2020 can it do? Oof, not much. Oh gosh, look at this triangle. It's 60%, not even 70. Now here is the one that, in order to be UHD Alliance certified, we have to be at least 90%. Does it make it? Oof, it's right there on the border. Now, if we measured like vivid mode, it might hit over 90%, and that's how they got their UHD Alliance, you know, license. But at least calibrated, quote unquote calibrated, not quite there. It's just a little short, but you know, it's not horrible. Now, I'm using the 7G, so I do have some images in the 7G that are HDR. Let's go back to video generator, the patterns. So there's a skin tone pattern here in 2020. That's part of the PVA patterns, the Professional Video Alliance. And it looks terrible on camera, but looks really good in person. Let's look at another one that I know. Okay, let's look at one more. I like this one. If you guys have the 7G, there's some really cool clips. Yeah, it doesn't look bad. I mean, I've seen it much better, but again, this is a 390 nit TV that shows art. So I'm not expecting it to perform like a, you know, OLED or a really good QLED or something like that. But it doesn't look bad. That's the point. Jacob had another comment. I once calibrated a JMGO N1 Ultra. It was giving me 98% of 2020. That was amazing. That does sound really cool. But Jacob, I have to admit, JMGO N1, what is that? Is that a laser short throw projector or something? Because I've seen some ultra short throws lately that cover 2020 really, really well. In fact, I've got a Hisense tri-laser in my other room right now, and it hits past 2020 green. So everything looks really fake and cartoonish, but the fact that it can do it is cool, because one day when we have that content, it'll be able to do it. So that's kind of a win. But yeah, just let me know, Jacob, what a JMGO N1 is. But guys, I'm not going to keep it too much longer. You've been hanging out with me for hours now, and I super appreciate it. I hope you learned something. Maybe you got a couple tips here and there on the Samsung. Jacob says, yeah, it's a tri-laser. So yeah, tri-laser, man, it doesn't surprise me. I'd be curious. Was it undersaturated on any of the primaries at all? Or if it was 98%, that means something had to be a tad undersaturated. But at 98%, I'm just curious, but at 98%, I wouldn't be worried about it. But that's pretty awesome. We're really getting close. And I think with quantum dots and lasers and these types of things, we're going to get there really soon. And then, for the very few titles that we have that are in 2020, we're going to have more eventually, of course. But I think it's really cool because it's kind of like if you get a new pair of headphones and you go back and like re-listen to your entire music catalog. When we have some 2020 machines and displays, and we have some 2020 software and content, then I think we're going to go back and rewatch some of our favorite movies, and kind of the same thing. Wow, I never noticed that green before, never noticed that red before. But oh, Jacob says everything was normal. Cool, yeah, 98%. I mean, that sounds about right. That's cool. So if you guys have any other final questions, feel free, type them in now. If not, again, thank you so much for hanging out with me for all this time. If you guys have any, like I said, if you have any feedback or feature requests or anything like that for Calman, please let me know, because we're kind of making a wish list right now for those guys in that team. Just let me know what you'd like to see, or if you have anything that's really giving you like a headache right now, shoot me an email. It's real easy. Jason, I've got 2 email addresses right now. Jason@murideo.com still works, and Jason@avproglobal is my main one now, and it will be my main one going forward. But my Murideo email will probably work for quite some time. So if you guys have any feedback, let me know. If you guys want me to do more videos like this with different brands of TVs and stuff like that, let me know, because I want to show you guys things, and I want to make sure you guys are comfortable when you work on these TVs. And if I can help in any way, make you more comfortable, more confident, then let's do a TCL TV. Let's do one of the new Hisense. I just got one of the new Hisenses just recently. Let's do the new model of this or that. So if you guys want to see anything specific, let me know. If you have any requests for Calman, let me know. Other than that, I will check the question box. Ben says he'd like to see a walkthrough on a MadVR or a Lumigen. Stay tuned for that. There have been some conversations. Ben also says Virtual Japan on YouTube has some cool HDR test content. I haven't seen that one, but that's a good tip. I'll look that up. Virtual Japan, if you guys look it up on YouTube, Ben says there's some cool clips. There's a bunch of good clips on YouTube right now. There's a couple good HDR channels I follow that are really doing some really cool content. So anyway, guys, again, thanks a bunch. Let me know if you have some questions or comments or feedback and anything else you might want to see. And please, please, please let me know what your wish list is for Calman, because again, if we don't give them feedback, they're not going to make these changes. So please let me know. Shoot me an email if you have some questions. Ladislav has another question. Do you plan on doing something with color space? We have done lots of color space videos with Steve. They're a bit older at this point. I know Steve just did some major updates to color space, and I'm really, really excited and happy to sit with him to look at some of the new features in action. But yeah, we can certainly do that. No problem at all. All right, guys, cool. Enjoy your afternoon. Thanks again for hanging out, and I'll see you next time.